I'll go ahead. Adequate notice of this meeting, as required by the Open Public Meetings Act, was provided through the posting, mailing, and filing of the annual notice of regularly scheduled meetings of the Town Council on December 13th, 2022. The notice was on that date posted on the bulletin board of the municipal building, provided to the Westfield Leader in the Star Ledger, and filed with the clerk of the town of Westfield. Ms. Lodgy, may I have a roll call? Here.
Here.
Farley?
Here.
LaGrippo?
Here.
Katz?
Here.
Mackey? Here. Contract? Oh, he's on. There he is.
Here.
Here.
Please rise for the invocation, which will be given by Councilman Katz, and remain standing for the salute to the flag.
We meet to serve our community, to use our resources wisely and well, to represent all members of our community fairly, and to make decisions that promote the common good. We recognize our responsibility to the past and the future, and the rights and needs of both individuals and community. As trusted servants, we seek support on our deliberations and on our efforts here today. May we act wisely and well.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So Councilman Contract is joining us remotely. He's traveling for work. And Councilman, I just want to let you know there's a delay in your speaking. So just be mindful of that you're about 5 seconds behind the rest of us. Okay, so Jim, do you have any updates?
Hold on, skip my comments. We have a lot of stuff to go through tonight. And I just want to say, just audio visual, like you said, David Contract is on the screen. And we have 2 of our 3 screens working tonight. This one has a little malfunction today, so, but these will be working. And so we'll have, we go right into a presentation now from Don Samet, very short, for our annual affordable housing compliance. That to be followed right after that with our professionals jump in their presentation. I don't know if you're gonna have your comments first, Mayor, or after. Okay, great, thank you, yep.
That would be great.
Jim, real quick, the council chambers look great. Do you know when the pictures are gonna be put back up with the mayors?
Not, I don't know that yet. We're actually still working on the room. We have technology advances to make, and also on the walls, as you can hear in the room, the acoustics are still not the perfect. We thought the flooring would help with that, so we're looking into acoustic panels for the walls before we actually put anything back.
Okay, but the
So-
plan is to put them back
The
up?
plan is actually, maybe they put them back, or maybe they put them in the hallway, because frankly, we've actually got a lot of comments over the years that if you don't come to the council chambers, you don't really see the mayor. So we actually have a lot of hallway space, so we're just trying to figure out what the right spot is. But right now, the next step in the room is acoustic panels to the walls.
Okay, great, because I think Tom wants his picture back up.
Tom wants his picture back up, okay, good, thanks.
So I'll set you up there, Dawn. So thanks, everybody. I do just want to remind everybody that public comment will be accepted in person only. We're live streaming for viewing only via Facebook, and the replay is always available on Facebook, YouTube, and TV 36. Before we get to our agenda items tonight, I did want to briefly mention 3 other topics, starting with a big shout out and congrats to our state championship winners, the Westfield High School boys track and boys swimming Blue Devils. I also want to thank the police and fire departments for meeting them at the border of Westfield and giving them their parades into town after they won the championship. Both teams had an incredible season, and we'll be welcoming them at a future council meeting to formally recognize them. I do also want to make sure some residents have important context about the annual sewer bills that have begun to arrive at homes this week. The unanimous vote on the new fee after 2 years of no increases was taken at our last meeting. But given the late hour at which that vote occurred following One Westfield Place discussions, I'm going to ask Finance Committee Chair, Councilman Linda Hapgood, just to provide everybody with a little background and details on the sewer fee, which we didn't get to speak to last week.
Thank you, Mayor. You probably all got your sewer bill yesterday or the day before. It is an increase over the last year. We try actually not to increase the sewer fees every year, but try to manage the process. The RVSA sends a bill to us every year. We have to pay them. It went up by $150,000 this year. Over the last few years, it can go up by several $100,000. We're basically trying to, we are trying to manage how much the taxpayer pays. So we subsidize it at approximately 50% for each of the residents. And so the increase that you see this year is just as a result of us trying to keep in that 50% range. I think it's probably apropos tonight to mention that, the taxes that you pay, only 16% of them go to cover the costs of the expenses of the municipality. One of the things that the pilot programs that we're looking at tonight and have approved with the elite property on South Avenue is that incoming revenue can help us to manage not having to increase things like the sewer fee in the future. So, thank you, Mayor.
We also tonight have our annual required affordable housing update, which will be a brief presentation by Town Planner Don Salmon. And this entire council, we want to thank Don. He's incredibly well respected and well regarded in the state for his knowledge on anything related to affordable housing obligations. And one is the reason why we are, I think, a star in the COA world for in large part to Don's efforts. And lastly, as I'm sure you're all aware, we'll be voting on some important yet standard next steps for the One Westfield Place proposal following the adoption of the redevelopment plan on February 14th. So I just wanted to give you a little context for exactly what is happening this evening. We're voting on resolutions on the following topics. We're authorizing execution of the redevelopment agreement and project improvement construction agreement. And we're approving the long-term tax exemption application jointly filed by 8 Streetworks Development urban renewal entities, and you'll hear more about that from our professionals shortly. And we're also introducing the following ordinances, which will have second readings and public hearings before adoption votes on March 14th, which is the next council meeting. It's an ordinance authoring 8 financial agreements, which is for the one project divided into 8 separate agreements, which we'll talk about. Ordinance authorizing 8 special assessment agreements, and the redevelopment area bond ordinance. And you'll hear more about all of those later this evening. And I just do want to remind everybody, I think it's important to note that these follow a lengthy and very public series of legislative steps that have led us to this point. It began in June of 2020, when we designated the train station parcels as areas in need of redevelopment. Then there was the August 2020 designation of Lord and Taylor parcels as areas in need of redevelopment, followed in October 2020 as the designation of the rehabilitation parcels. And contrary to, I think, what many critics have indicated, these actions were taken at a time when our town council meetings were among some of the most widely ever attended, due to the availability of our residents working from home during COVID with easy access to these meetings on Zoom for viewing and virtual public comment. So following these designations, which included presentations by our town planner and topology to provide the basis for those recommendations, as well as public comment, we then took the following actions. In November of 2020, we adopted the initial redevelopment plan. In December of 2020, there was the conditional designation of Streetworks. In May of 2022, there was the adoption of the amended initial redevelopment plan. And in February, just last month, the adoption of the Lord and Taylor train station redevelopment plan, which brings us to tonight. So as I had indicated in my State of the Town address on January 3rd, the next step after the adoption of the redevelopment plan, the RDP, which you guys are probably very familiar with at this point, is a vote on the redevelopment agreement, the RDA, which is a standard requirement and next step in any redevelopment project. And while the recent adoption of the redevelopment plan set the zoning for the project, it's the RDA that we're voting on tonight, which finalizes the terms of our partnership with HBC Streetworks Development. And as you'll hear in more detail shortly, the RDA protects the town and holds Streetworks to a set of agreed upon standards that allow the town to maintain control almost every aspect of the project until its completion. This is only possible by leveraging the state's redevelopment laws, a process that began with the public designation of these properties as areas in need of redevelopment almost 3 years ago. So the RDA and the related financial agreements are the result of ongoing negotiations between our team of redevelopment professionals, again, from you'll hear from shortly, and the Streetworks team, many of whom are here tonight. The Town Council Finance Policy Committee, led by Chair Linda Hapgood and Vice Chair Mark Parmalee, has been instrumental in guiding these negotiations and have worked tirelessly to negotiate terms that are in the best long-term fiscal interest of the town. So in terms of process, tonight we're going to be hearing a presentation on the terms of the RDA and its related financial components from our redevelopment legal counsel, Steve Valenick, our redevelopment finance professional, Bob Powell, and redevelopment bond counsel, Matt Jessup, who you all know probably very well by now. Similar to previous meetings, this presentation will take place in the beginning of the meeting and is directed to the members of the town council, affording elected officials the opportunity to ask questions in this public setting. And while I recognize many of you are here tonight to offer public comments, I do ask for your patience during this very important presentation. The public will be invited to comment later in the meeting during the public comment portion, consistent with standard practice. And so for those concerned that there hasn't been sufficient time to digest the financial documents that were shared over the weekend, I do want to remind you that tonight we are only voting on a resolution to accept the pilot application, not on the agreement itself of the financial agreements. Of course, we're voting on the redevelopment agreement resolution. The ordinances related to the financial agreements are only being introduced this evening, with public hearings to be held on each of the 3 ordinances at the March 14th meeting before being voted on for adoption that same evening. So consistent with our last meeting, I do want to reiterate that I'm going to insist on maintaining decorum this evening and that each speaker be respectfully allowed to provide their public comment without interruption. So just really, again, thank you all for being here tonight to discuss these very exciting next steps for Westfield. And with that, I think I'm introducing our town planner, Don Samet, to do his brief affordable housing update for us. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Annually, pursuant to our settlement agreement with the Fair Share Housing Center and our court-approved affordable housing plan, we're required to report out at a noticed council meeting in the month of February even, our ability to implement our affordable housing plan, those efforts we have taken in the prior year. So I'll be talking to you this evening about 2022. And we're specifically supposed to touch upon the efforts we've taken to provide 20 additional affordable homes beyond what our housing plan calls for. Half of those 20 homes are supposed to be for families, and we're to work with nonprofit affordable housing developers to help us create those 20 homes. So, our housing plan implementation continues, showing that the plan is providing the realistic opportunity for the creation of affordable units in town. Some highlights from 2022 for you include that we saw approvals for projects, which would result in the creation of 49 new family affordable units. 38 of those 49 units are presently under construction in town. Our affordability assistance program, which we established, continues to be utilized. We saw an additional award in 2022 under our 3 months rental assistance program, making 5 total awards under that program to date. Specifically in our working with our nonprofits, by our court-approved plan, we have dedicated funding from our Affordable Housing Trust Fund for this purpose. Now, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is funded through development fees, not taxpayer dollars, and we have money specifically dedicated, again, to working with nonprofits. And in 2022, we saw funding awards totaling approximately $483,000, which would allow for the creation of 10 special needs housing units through our nonprofit housing program. You may remember throughout the year, you had to pass resolutions for each of those separate projects, allowing us to utilize funding for that. We've also dedicated funds under our Affordable Housing Assistance Program for nonprofits for emergency generators for 100% affordable projects. Every year we host an annual meeting with nonprofits, and we did so last December, and that's an opportunity for us to come together with them. They make proposals to us, give us ideas, and we describe what resources we have here in town to share with them and help them create units in town. Finally, I'll mention that the American Legion, you may recall, hosted a meeting this past September where they discussed a plan to create veterans housing at the Legion site on North Avenue. Right now, the estimate is that we could have anywhere between 20 to 25 units of veterans housing at the Legion site. We're continuing to work with them. We met with them as recently as last week, and they're planning another public meeting in the coming months to discuss this project. So I'm pleased to say our housing plan continues to be implemented. I don't see any hiccups or barriers in the way to providing a realistic opportunity or our continued opportunity and ability to provide a realistic opportunity to create affordable units. And I always like to conclude with a public service announcement that if anyone out there is interested in getting on the waiting list for an affordable unit in Westfield, you can fill out a pre-application at www.affordablehomesnewjersey.com, and that will bring you to a site where you can fill in some initial information for units not only in Westfield, but I should mention for other locations throughout the state. So everything's going well, I'm pleased to say. We still have at least a couple more years with our existing housing plan before we create our next. But we're good. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, happy to answer.
Don, just real quick, all
Yeah.
the new units will go toward the next round of affordable housing?
They go to satisfy our unmet need. Exactly how those will apply into the fourth round, we don't know yet. But we have that obligation to satisfy under the third round, which we're in now, opportunities, ways to provide affordable housing. We did that through a number of means, overlay zone districts, inclusionary zone districts, working with nonprofits. So will they count? The answer is yes. Exactly how they're gonna work in fourth round figures and calculations, we don't know yet.
Okay, thank you.
And Don, the next round is right around the corner.
2025.
2025,
Yeah.
which will be here before we know it, right?
I know, I'm gonna blink, I'm gonna be writing the next plan.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Great job,
you.
as always.
Just say one thing, Mayor, and it's important to note this, every year I say the same thing, but it's important just to reiterate how lucky we are to have Don. This is not easy stuff, it's complicated stuff, but it also takes great organization and accuracy to make sure that we're getting the most credits we can get in the right way to get them for our town based upon our plan. So I just, it's important to make sure you know how much Don does, along with John Drill, our Affordable Housing Council, who's been excellent for us, and so keeping us in compliance, but also, as you mentioned earlier, keeping us in very high regard with Affordable Housing Council of the State of New Jersey and with Fair Share Housing. So, thank you.
Completely agree. So I think we're up next with our redevelopment team.
Yes, give us 1 minute as we just transition to the presentation, and if we want to switch council and contract to the presentation so we can see easier. It's been easy to switch. I'll switch them to the screen so we can see. And then good to go. And you don't have to be right in the microphone.
So just wait for that to switch.
No, he's gonna You can start.
Okay.
So we're keeping Councilman Contract here and
Yes, and
we're looking here.
Screen's gonna be switched so you can see the presentation.
Got it. All right.
All right.
There we go.
So I think I was going to do just as a reminder of what's happening tonight. As I mentioned in my remarks, we've had a really top-rate team leading our process on this, and you're going to hear from them tonight. Again, you've heard from them previously. We're going to begin with Steve Malenik, who's a partner in Greenbaum Law. He's our redevelopment legal counsel. Bob Powell is going to follow. He's the partner in Nassau Capital Advisors. He's the redevelopment finance expert. And then Matt Jessup will bring up the rear. He's a partner at Manneman Scott, and he's our bond counsel. And then, of course, Finance Committee Chair Linda Hapgood and Vice Chair Mark Harmley has been very involved. And all the members of the Finance Committee have really been intimately involved in these negotiations, which currently includes Parmley, Root, and Scott Katz, and of course, Councilman Contract was on the Finance Committee all of last year. I also want to acknowledge, obviously, nothing ever happens in this town without Town Administrator Jim Gilday. His insight and into, obviously, everything our municipal government has been critical. And Economic Development Consultant Liz Jeffrey, who's here, longtime Westfield resident, and along with, of course, former mayor, as we remind everybody, and our town attorney, Tom Jardine, have all been part of these negotiations. And so I think with that, am I kicking it off to you, Steve?
That's right, Mayor. All right, good evening, Mayor, good evening, council members. I'll first just want to echo what you said, Mayor. One of the privileges that we get to do as attorneys that work for multiple towns is get to observe a lot of different town staff members, and I have to say, this project doesn't get done, and you were very, very fortunate to have people like Jim, Don, Kim, Maureen, Liz on your team. Just first class, top team, and a privilege to work with them. So I'm very excited tonight to be able to talk to you all about the next step in the redevelopment project of the One Westfield Place project that started, as the mayor mentioned, in earnest back in December of 2020, when a conditional designation agreement was entered into with Streetworks Development a little over 2 years. And that agreement kickstarted what that agreement calls the pre-development activities, in which the parties were to cooperate together in coming up with a plan that satisfies and meets the goals and objectives, not just of your master plan, which you heard of through the redevelopment plan process, but also the redevelopment plan itself, which was adopted a few weeks ago. This plan is on your screen and generally represents 3 zones that you've heard of. Many times we've talked about the West Zone, the North Zone, and the South Zone. And the agreement today is literally the culmination of thousands of hours of time between not just the town's professionals, but of the town's finance committee, the mayor, and the town's staff members to work towards an agreement that protects the town while meeting those same goals and objectives of the redevelopment plan. Notwithstanding those hours of work, a lot of what you're going to hear tonight is not new. It's what we've been talking about on the Facebook Lives, at the council meetings, when we had the presentation back on January 17th, things we've heard of during the redevelopment plan presentation. This is really memorializing those terms and those agreements that we've been talking about for so long. Just as a recap of the project, there are 3 zones, the West Zone, the North Zone, and the South Zone, and on your screen is the 5 components that make up the West Zone. There's the L&T office project, which is the adaptive reuse of the existing Lord & Taylor's building into office, amenity, and retail restaurant space. There's the 2 residential components on both sides of that. Across the street, there's the North Avenue Townhome Project and the Clark Ferris Townhome Project, each with 16 townhomes. And then on the north and south, there's 1 component on the north, that's the North Zone Loft Residential Project, which is of course going to be built adjacent to the North Garage, and then the 2 office buildings on the south, together making up the 8 components. But of course, the project is more than the private components. There's, as you'll hear tonight, significant public improvements that are integrated as part of the redevelopment, which is what makes this a unified, cohesive redevelopment project, really for that whole central nervous system of the railroad line down that connects the north and south of Westfield. And on your screen are the list of things that we've been talking about for a long time that are incorporated into the redevelopment agreement. So of course the town the square, the town green, the 2 public parking garages, the upgraded technology for the parking system, of course the traffic and congestion mitigation upgrades, Quimby Street roadway improvements, all the streetscape improvements, including the trees and the sidewalks, the mobility hub enhancements, the pedestrian walkway, the train station tunnel, and other pedestrian safety and environmental remediation of the town properties, which altogether is significant public improvement that only happens as part of this redevelopment project. So what we're talking about today in my presentation, you're going to hear also from Bob and Matt on the financial side, but what I'll be talking to you today about is the redevelopment agreement, which is on your agenda tonight to be voted on. As the mayor said, this is the agreement that memorializes the public-private partnership you have with the redeveloper here and governs the terms and obligations that the redeveloper is agreeing to in undertaking this project. So among other things, and we're going to talk about a few of the details, it does designate Streetworks as the redeveloper for the properties. It describes the project that is being undertaken and the town is agreeing to, and it attaches to it, and we're gonna talk about it on the next slide, the concept plans, the renderings, the plans, the design manual, so to speak, the playbook, that goes hand in hand with the redevelopment plan that was adopted for what the project is going to be. It establishes the administration and the implementation mechanisms for how the redevelopment is going to operate. You may be approving an agreement tonight, we may be executing it shortly, but this redevelopment really is going to be years in the making, and during those years, there's going to be administrative processes that need to be understood, and that's what this agreement does. It incorporates all the other agreements that you're going to hear about tonight, including financial agreements, what we're referring to as the PICA, which is the Public Improvement Construction Agreement, which I'll talk about, the PIFA, the Public Improvement Financing Agreement, and others. It limits transfers. We'll have a slide on that, so I'll go into that on the other slide. It establishes the terms upon which the town is conveying the portions of the north and south parking lots to the redeveloper, and it sets forth what happens in the event there is a default. Obviously, this is an agreement, and we're contemplating worst-case scenarios. That's what we do as lawyers, and we try to protect the town and set forth those remedies in the event that there is a default. So let's talk about the overall structure of the redevelopment. You may recall with the Westfield Crossing project that's currently under construction, that was a project that was undertaken in two components. So we added a redevelopment agreement with two different urban renewal entities. Obviously, this is a different project at a different scale. So here we're talking about 8 urban renewal entities, all affiliated with Streetworks Development that are going to undertake the project, each one controlling one of the 8 private components that I outlined earlier. This is a very common mechanism for how redevelopment projects are undertaken, certainly at ones where there are multiple buildings and multiple components, and it's important to understand why that's advantageous both for the developer but also for the town. Obviously, it attracts capital partners for different components who are only interested in certain aspects of the project, same with financing. But importantly to the town, you have on your agenda tonight the introduction of ordinances for financial agreements and special assessment agreements. There are 8 versions of that, one for each building. Those terms of those financial agreements start upon completion, and they're going to start all at different times because of the schedule of this proposed project. So we want each of those to stand on their own and actually have different terms and start bringing revenue into the town. I mentioned transfers before. This is important. We've been talking to Streetworks for all these years. We've gotten to know them. We've gotten to know their key leaders. We've gotten to vet them. And it's for that reason that the Finance Committee and the town has conditionally designated them and is now on the agenda to consider designating them as the redeveloper. So we want them to be our partner in this public-private partnership. So to ensure that, we limit their ability to sell the project, to sell the properties underlying the project, to sell the majority of their membership interest in their entity, or to sell control of their entity. And we do that through prohibiting transfers, not just in the redevelopment agreement, but also in a declaration of covenants that gets recorded with the county clerk against all their properties, putting all future owners or transferees on notice that that is a prohibition under the redevelopment agreement. So other than permitted transfers or transfers that this governing body approves in the future, they are prohibited. Any transfer would be an event of default. With respect to the project itself, the redevelopment agreement attaches several exhibits. You see them here listed on your screen that all collectively make up what we call the concept plans. So if you've taken a look at the redevelopment agreements the town has done previously with respect to the Westfield Crossing or the Handler Building or the Sophia project, it's a little bit different in that those projects at the time it came to you, we had site plans, we had floor plans, we had, baked projects ready to go to the planning board, and that's fine, and that works fine. But there are also redevelopment projects undertaken very, very often like this, where we're undertaking the project before those designs are fully, designed for site plan, designed for construction. So the concept plans that are attached set forth the design guidelines and standards that this town governing body is going to be approving, and the most important thing is it limits it to what the redevelopment plan allows, and it limits it in terms of size, in terms of unit counts, to what the redevelopment agreement specifically says. In terms of the construction schedule, there are 2 exhibits that are attached to the redevelopment agreement. One is the construction schedule, which is an estimate of when each component is going to commence, when it is going to complete, and where it falls in terms of sequencing, and I can tell the council that this was a lot of time and effort undertaken by all of your professionals and the professionals of street work to make sure that the sequencing works, not just from a financing point of view or in terms of the impact it's going to have on neighborhoods, but also with respect to the traffic mitigation and where each of those elements falls in line with the sequencing in play. There's also a separate exhibit, the construction milestones exhibit, that's attached. This exhibit is important. This is what says the absolute end deadline for the redeveloper for them to achieve each of the milestones in this project. Otherwise, a default would occur. So those are two exhibits that are attached to the RDA. As council knows, the redevelopment agreement includes the sale of portions of property on the north side of the train station and the south side. On the north side, it's approximately 0.22 acres, and on the south side, approximately 2.045 acres of property. So not the whole lots, just portions in which the private development is going to incur. The redevelopment agreement sets forth a lot of general conditions that have to be met before we ever sell them the property. They're not on the screen, but obviously they cannot be in default. And most importantly, they have to demonstrate to us, based on a current project budget, that they have the resources to come up with the equity necessary to complete the project, but also that they have the construction financing with a reputable lender to finance the portion that they're not bringing to the table themselves. Notwithstanding those general obligations, each of the north and south have specific obligation or conditions that need to be met before the town is going to sell them those properties. So with respect to the north, they have to meet all the conditions under the public improvement financing agreement that will issue the North Garage bonds. So that includes things like footings and foundations on the Lord and Taylor site have to be complete. $18 million of private equity have to already have been invested into the project by Streetworks before we'll sell them those properties. In addition, on the north side, because the North Garage is going to be built in connection with the Lofts project, and the parking to be provided for that Lofts project, 35 spaces are going to be in that garage, the execution of a parking license agreement with payments to be made to the town for those spaces is also conditional. On the south side, we do not sell them the property until the completion of the north garage. Those spaces have to be completed and available to the public before anything happens on the south lot. And you'll see in the box there in the bottom, the council may recall that in previous meetings, we've had discussions about the sales price of these lots in a range of the $10 million number. We also advised at that time that that number was subject to independent verification by an appraiser to verify the fair market value. That appraiser we went to came back with an independent appraisal that said fair market value is actually about $10.6 million. So we would have been able to sell the property for about $10.6 million. But in that valuation report, which will be available on the town's website, I think tomorrow, will be available on the town's website tomorrow, they undertook the evaluation using two different methodologies and blended, which is what appraisers do, those two methodologies to come up with that $10.6 million number. But the town negotiated with Streetworks and said, well, rather than do that blend, we really think it important, and Streetworks agreed that the sales price be the top of those two methodologies, which is the $11.1 million number you see here. So the report that you'll see on the town website tomorrow from the independent appraiser, the 11.1 is the highest of the methodologies used to value the properties, and they were valued with the zoning that was approved in the redevelopment plan 2 weeks ago. So with respect to traffic and parking, the redevelopment agreement makes clear the importance of both of those issues with respect to the construction of this project. It requires that the traffic impact study will be approved as part of the redevelopment agreement be adhered to, that the mitigation techniques that are incorporated there are used, and that the improvements themselves are sequenced in an order that the traffic professionals, that the town's traffic professional has agreed provides the least impact on the construction to the town. With respect to the parking, it incorporates the parking plan and the shared parking plan that the redevelopment plan obligates that must be adhered to by the Streetworks team. It also requires that Streetworks, prior to obtaining a certificate of occupancy for any of their tenants in the office buildings, they provide a traffic demand management plan that is approved by the town. This is also something in your redevelopment plan. But importantly for the RDA, because this is not going to be produced until they have a tenant down the road, we have incorporated that directly into the declaration of covenants that gets recorded against the property. So that requirement is going to last for the entire duration of the pilot, a full 30 years. They're going to have a requirement to have this traffic demand management plan and follow it in accordance with their office tenants to reduce the amount of trip generation from their tenants. In addition, we've also built in what the redevelopment plan refers to as a post-occupancy report, which provides that after 2 years of operation of the office buildings, if they are Streetworks is finding that they have excess parking in their own lots themselves, they can produce a post-occupancy report that proves that out, and the town would then have a right of first refusal to license those spaces, additional spaces for the public, which is another benefit to the town if that happens. With respect to the construction, prior to each component, so those 8 components, prior to either of them obtaining a building permit, we require Streetworks to produce and have approved by the town a construction plan. That plan has to provide for traffic and detour plans stemming from the construction, has to provide for detailed construction staging, and importantly, it has to provide a mitigation plan for any commuter parking that is anticipated to be lost. And that mitigation, if there are spaces that are going to be lost because of the private development of Streetworks, those mitigation techniques have to be paid for by Streetworks. Those plans also have to consider not just that particular component's construction, but the construction of the overall project throughout the town for the duration of that construction. Additionally, the redevelopment agreement sets forth various requirements of the project, including affordable housing, which you just heard from your town planner, how important that is. With respect to the affordable housing, we did build in a provision that if the project ever decreases in the number of units being provided, for one reason or the other, if that results in a loss of affordable units in the multifamily buildings, that they have to replace that with workforce housing. So no matter what happens, what gets built in terms of the multifamily units, if it goes down, the same number of affordable housing units or workforce housing units will be built. We build in requirements for the age-restricted housing. I know there may be some concern that what happens if there's not a market for that. They'll have to come back before all of you and make a decision when that happens, because the redevelopment agreement obligates them, and the declaration of covenants that gets recorded against the property will include a deed restriction that they have to be age-restricted. Similar to your other redevelopment agreements, it incorporates affirmative action and small business requirements that they undertake programs to provide opportunities for those contractors. It requires that the project be built using various green project features, including your own town's checklist. But on top of that, we've already talked about the south building is going to be constructed in the mass timber construction, which is a very exciting opportunity in New Jersey. And the redeveloper is also committed to constructing, meeting what the criteria would be for LEED Silver, which is also a very exciting prospect for the green aspect of the project. And on the bottom, I threw in a couple, the redevelopment agreement has a number of provisions on these, but it talks about how they're supposed to maintain the construction site, what the construction hours are, where they're supposed to park during construction, the number of progress meetings and progress reports. And what it all boils down to is the level of control that the town is going to have over this project that it wouldn't have for an infill development that's not a redevelopment project subject to an RDA. So with respect to the public improvements, it was critical that these public improvements be done in a unified way together with the private improvements, because that's how they were designed and that's how they should be developed, that they integrate with one another. To do that, we have a separate agreement that is Exhibit B of your resolution, which is known as the Public Improvements Construction Agreement. Each public improvement that I listed earlier on in the redevelopment agreement is specifically associated with one of the private improvements. Now, why that's important is because for the redeveloper to obtain what's called a certificate of completion, which is the document that evidences that they've done everything they were supposed to under the redevelopment agreement, and now they're released from that redevelopment agreement, and now they just own the project. For them to get that, we tied the public improvements for each component to a private component, which means that they don't get that certificate unless they do what they're supposed to do and complete each of the public improvements associated with that private component. As I mentioned before, there are several agreements, and there is a relationship between all those agreements. The redevelopment agreement, as I said, makes Streetworks responsible for the public improvements. The construction agreement sets forth the obligations and responsibilities of Streetworks as the construction manager to the town. The public improvements financing agreement sets forth the funding for those public improvements. Each of the financial agreements sets forth the terms of the pilot, and of course, the annual service charges from those pilots are being used to pay down the debt service. And the special assessment agreements, which you'll hear more about later, provides the town the security on that debt service. So specifically with respect to the PICA, as I said, it obligates them to serve as the construction manager to further the public-private partnership that we're entering into with Streetworks over the overall project. Importantly, the town maintains complete control over these public improvements, both as to the design and throughout the process of constructing the public improvements. It obligates the redeveloper to obtain sealed bids for the general contractors and at least 3 sealed bids for each subcontractor, which must be paid prevailing wage. And each of the contracts with the general contractors have to be under what's called a guaranteed maximum price contract, which means once we agree to it, and the town, of course, will have to agree to each of those contracts. Once agreed, that is setting the maximum price that each of those public improvements is going to cost under those agreements. And finally, in terms of further protections, the town has built in its right, and it will exercise this right to have what's called an owner's representative for each of these construction projects, overseeing the construction and being the eyes and ears of the town, and the cost of that is built in to the overall public improvements project. So with that, I will entertain any questions or wait till the end. Otherwise, I can turn it over to our next presenter.
That would be great. Wait till
Quick question?
Sure.
Just real quick, the pilots are paid over 8 phases, so timeline, when year do you project phase 1 will be completed?
I'm going to put a pin in that because I think we're going to have a lot of slides on the timing of those
That's
pilots.
about how.
Yep. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Just want to make one comment for the public. There's a lot of information on these slides, and sometimes it can be hard to read if you're watching on Facebook Live. Just a reminder that the presentation will be posted on Facebook, on our website after the presentation. And we found that many people will go back to the website to see the presentation and kind of go through it. So if you can't see all the slides, we're going through it. Obviously, it'll be fully viewable and public on our website probably later on tonight. Thanks.
Mr. Powell, real quick, we're going out to bond tonight for $57 million. There's a lot of residents out here concerned how this project is being financed. I know the city of Summit just released you from their duties. Can you elaborate on what happened there?
Actually, Councilman, can we let them get through the presentation and then we'll ask
We'll ask
questions?
them after that, okay. Yeah, I'd like to hear what happened there.
Thank you. And actually, Councilman Hackgood can speak to that specifically.
Good evening. What I'd like to do this evening, as Jim had indicated, is cover with you an element of this official action that's about to be taken by the governing body with respect to a financial agreement for a pilot. My comments are not going to have to do with legal issues or planning or traffic, but rather focusing on the financial aspects of this project and the feasibility of the project as it would affect your decision about whether the project needs a pilot agreement in order to be successful. The project is a substantial financial undertaking. Just to give you some sense of the numbers, the total projected cost of this development is about $383 million. Of that amount of money that will have to be raised privately, that's just the private side of this project, a substantial part of that will be borrowed as debt, but another $100 million plus of the project will be provided by developer equity, private capital in both cases. So what I was asked to do and what our office has done is provide for the benefit of the governing body and the public an underwriting of the project financially, similar to the type of underwriting that will go on by lenders and equity partners of the developer to determine the feasibility of the project and its level of profitability if the private capital is put to work. We have prepared previously a series of financial analyses of this project going back some time. I was here virtually for the Facebook Live presentation in January, providing a preliminary financial analysis. Subsequently, we've continued to review the latest application that was put forward by the developer for a financial agreement last week and update the numbers that we had put together previously to determine the most recent assessment of the financial feasibility and therefore the need for the pilot. The process of doing that financial analysis, as you see, involves looking at a series of data inputs that go into the project. The detailed development costs, projected rents for market rate and affordable apartments, the estimated operating costs that have to be paid before there's any net income to the developer, and the sources and uses of funds that will be obtained to pay for the development costs. This analysis also requires, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, a series of detailed assumptions about increases in rental income, projected vacancies, and operating expenses over a holding period. Before I dive into the form of analysis that we did and give you a summary of our conclusions, let me just review with you the standard terms of a pilot agreement for the reference purposes. The agreement this is all done under a state statute, the long-term tax exemption statute. And the terms of a pilot agreement typically are 30 years. It can be less than that, but it's typically 30 years from the time the agreement is effective. The pilot agreement provides that in lieu of conventional taxes, the project pays what's called an annual service charge, also known as ASC. That annual service charge is actually a very simple standard from an accounting point of view. It's a charge that's based on annual gross revenues of the rental project. And we're talking just here about rental projects. It's the top line of a rental project. It's the gross rents, the parking fees, the fees that are paid for vending machines, laundry rooms, whatever other fees the developer is collecting before any operating costs are deducted. That's the annual gross revenues. And the rate that's paid for the pilot is a percentage of annual gross revenues. So there's not a lot of complicated accounting needed to be done to determine what the annual gross revenues are. You just need an audit every year, and that is required under the agreement, an annual audit. The pilot also requires, in this particular case, because of the statutory provisions, that as part of the payment that the developer makes, it has to pay land taxes, full land taxes on the properties that are subject to the agreement, based on just the assessed value of the land that's being developed, but not the improvements. So there will be two components to the payments. There will be a total pilot payment, but then the developer will get a credit every quarter for the land tax payments that it has to make on each of the parcels. And those land tax payments, as I note here, are property taxes. So they're divided among the various units of local government, municipal, schools, county, library, and so forth. With respect to the pilot portion of these payments, the statute requires that 5% of them be paid over to the county and 95% go to the municipality. And the security for pilot payments are similar to tax payments. They are secured by a lien on the property and subject the property owner to foreclosure if the payments are not made. The pilot agreement that is going to be before you provides for these terms, the payment terms that you see here. Namely, for the first 5 years, 13% of annual gross revenues. That goes to 14% of annual gross revenues in years 6 through 15. And then for the last 15 years, 15% of annual gross revenues. The projections that we'll talk about a little later, but here's a summary of them. The projected revenues based on the full development and stabilization of all 8 of these urban renewal entities that Steve indicated would be formed are presented here in this worksheet. To answer one of your questions, I think one member of the council asked, when do we expect all of the improvements to be stabilized and built? And that would be in 2030. So in 2030, which is the yellow line here, we expect that all of the components of the UREs will be generating pilot payments. Some are further along in their operations and in their cash flows, but in that year, we expect total revenues in the categories that you see here: West Zone pilot revenues, West Zone land revenues, North-South pilot revenues, North-South land revenues, and total revenues. In that first stabilized year of 2030, we project $4.6 million of pilot revenues, and these are net to the town after the county's gotten its share. We'll come back to these totals later, but as you see at the bottom, over the period through 2056, I know some of you will still be here at that point, the pilot revenues are expected to total cumulatively about $213 million. So that's an overview of what the financial model is indicating the results would be. So what did we do to perform a financial analysis of this project? The first objective that we were asked to undertake is to determine whether the project would be financially feasible if it were subject to conventional real estate taxes. And if that analysis indicates that the project were not financially feasible if subject to full real estate taxes, we were asked to recommend the most appropriate structure and payment schedule for the pilot that would provide for financial feasibility on the one hand to the developer, but on the other hand, maximize the financial benefits of the pilot to the town. And that's the mission that we've undertaken. In order to do this financial analysis, our office employed strategies and research that are virtually identical to the underwriting process that banks and equity investors use when they are considering funding a real estate project. And I'm just going to summarize here on this chart a couple of on the left-hand side, the couple of the data points that are important to nail down. Land acquisition costs would be one for the north-south zone. Steve had mentioned that number is $11,100,000 per the negotiations we've had. We looked very carefully at estimated hard costs, which means labor and materials, for all of the various kinds of improvements, ranging from the renovation of the Lord and Taylor building, where the hard costs are a little lower because you have a structure there to begin with, all the way up to approximately $250 a square foot for ground-up construction for the new residential buildings and the new office buildings. Soft costs have to be factored into this, and those are things like design, legal fees, construction period interest. In my experience in doing several hundred of these kinds of analyses, as a general proposition, it's credible to assume that those are going to be roughly 10% of your hard costs, especially with a project of this size. Then we had to look at some really important income drivers of the project. First would be the projected rental rates for the various private improvements. Steve explained that this is a mixed-use project. It has virtually all kinds of real estate associated with it. It has low and moderate income housing residential, it has market rate housing, it has office space, and it has retail space. So each of those rental components can tell us from a market analysis what the likely rents are going to be based on the research that we have done. And we laid out there a summary, and these numbers, by the way, are more fully provided in the report that our firm issued last week to the town, and that it is on your website, Mayor, as you know, for somebody to look at. That report, by the way, is 60-some pages. It includes a narrative report. I'm digressing here briefly, but it includes a narrative report that explains in plain English what we did and what our conclusions were. And then there are about 55 individual worksheets that do the calculations and show you the detailed numbers and the relationship between the numbers that brought us to the conclusions that we reached. What I'm showing you here is a summary of that detail, but the highlights. Vacancy rates are a very important factor to nail down because for the most part, most rental properties are never 100% vacant, 100% occupied, all the time. And so we've used the research that is provided a little further down here to establish the vacancy rates for the office space, the residential, and the retail. Another factor that determines profitability in a rental property is what year over year or lease term over lease term you can expect the rents to escalate or not escalate at all. Because what we're going to be solving for is a return on investment of the project over a 10-year period, a holding period. And during that period, tenants will come and go, rents will be released, and there will be changes, in all likelihood, in those rents, and we have projected what we think those changes are likely to be in terms of inflation and vacancy rates. We also had to determine what realistically the operating costs were of these various components, and there's a great deal of data available in the commercial real estate business on the operating costs of high-end apartments, office buildings. It actually didn't really matter in the case of the office space here because these office buildings are typically rented, and in the case in here, they are rented under what are called net leases. So the numbers that we're going to show you for office rents are net of any operating cost. The tenants will pay additional rent to cover the operating costs in the office space. But for the apartments, as you know, if you've rented an apartment, I'm sure many of you have, you pay rent to the landlord and he pays or she pays the taxes, the maintenance, the insurance, and all the operating costs. So it's important to know what those operating costs are before we get to net operating income. And then it's important to understand for the return on equity in this environment, in the environment that we're dealing with now in the capital markets, what the ratio is going to be for this developer of debt to equity in funding the project. As a general proposition across all income cycles and economic cycles, it's almost always the case for a real estate developer that if you can, the more money you can borrow to build a real estate project, the more profitable it's going to be because the debt almost always is cheaper than the equity that you have to raise when you can't borrow any more money. The lenders have said, that's all I'm going to lend you. Equity tends to be priced much higher for a very simple reason. It's riskier. A lender will put a mortgage on the building, a first mortgage. If anything goes wrong, it has the first right to take the building. The equity holder doesn't have that right. His or her risks are much higher, but his opportunity to make more money is much higher. The lender's just going to make his interest rate. The equity investor is expecting to make way more of an interest return than the loan interest rate. So we have to decide in doing the financial model what percentage of the cost is going to be funded by debt and what percentage is going to be funded by equity. And in our experience universally has in the last probably 10 years, for development projects of this type, During the development period, developers can typically borrow 60% of the cost, and that's about it. And the other 40% has to be provided by the developer's equity. We looked at rental rates for new office space to determine what's the appropriate rate to project for this project. We have assumed here in the case of the office space for 1 Westfield Place that the office rents are going to be, for the Lord and Taylor space, $36 per square foot net in the west zone, and in the south zone, the 210,000 feet of new office space we project will be rented for $38 per square foot, and that's triple net of all operating costs. You'll see on that chart below the subject properties rent projections several notable leases that have recently been signed that we think are comparable leases and comparable buildings to the project's buildings here. And you'll see that those leases have been booked at rental rates net that are higher than we're projecting for the office space in 1 Westfield Plaza. Above $40 a square foot. And for the most part, these have all been relatively new buildings that have attracted, and the first two there are very recent projects, M Station and Valley National Bank, which have attracted 2 credit tenants consolidating space in state-of-the-art office space that's being built in Morristown right now. Office space that is a step way beyond traditional office space that was being built in the 80s and 90s, which is not competitive with what these buildings have offered the tenants. And that's why the rents are in the $40 a foot range. For residential projects, we looked at a series of what we consider to be comparable higher-end residential projects in this submarket. The rental rates for the 1 Westfield Place residential projects are projected to be roughly $3.75 to $4 a square foot. That's the sort of nomenclature that's used in comparing rents in one apartment building to another, is what's the rent per square foot. So in the case of 1 Westfield Place, we've assumed an average rent of $4 a square foot, and then we looked at 5 other comparable projects in the area where the rents, where the amenities were comparable but not quite as nice as what's being built in 1 Westfield Place. But these are nevertheless high-end apartments that are generating rents in the $350 to $450 a square foot range. And for that reason, I'm comfortable with the projected rents that we're showing here for the 2 residential projects, or the 2 residential locations that we're dealing with here. We looked carefully at a recent survey that CoStar and the Auto Group did for rental projects. Those of you that think that the retail market is dead, maybe a little premature. The leases are being signed now in this area of New Jersey with retailers in the mid $30 a square foot and up to the mid $45 a square foot range. Again, triple net. Location is very important, however, and the locations that you see in this list of comps tend to be high demographic communities, high income communities, and that's going to describe the retail that's going to be put into 1 Westfield Place. So we're comfortable with our rent projections there. which are, by the way, $35 a square foot. Let me go back. The rental rates we're looking at here average over $40 a square foot. Our projection for our model was 35 for the subject property, just to be conservative. An additional financial variable that drives profitability in a rental project are two other factors that we looked at carefully. One is rent growth over time. That is to say, year over year, as leases are renewed and turnover occurs, what can you credibly project is going to happen to the rental rates? Are they going to stay the same? Are they going to go up? Or are they going to go down? The first piece of this slide that you see here, which was provided again through CoStar and the Auto Group, looked at rent growth in Somerset, Morris, and Union, which is your immediate submarket here, as well as northern New Jersey, annualized over the last 10 years. And you'll see that there has been a significant upsurge in rent increases in this geographic area, especially in the last 5 years. This goes through 2022, by the way. Despite the challenges of COVID, apartment rents went up significantly during that period. And it's all because of one fundamental economic fact of life: supply and demand. There are more people looking for higher end apartments than are being produced. The supply of them in this particular area is limited. There are huge barriers to entry. I've been in this business for 30 years, and you talk to any apartment developer who's trying to do new apartments in suburban New Jersey towns, and they will all tell you the same thing. It's really hard to get them approved. And your process has not been any different than those in any other towns. This is not the same as Texas or Florida or parts of the Northwest, where the zoning is not nearly as tough as it is in New Jersey's northern sectors. So we have assumed in our projections, despite these optimistic increases, a 2.5% increase in rents year over year. Not 3.5, not 5, not 4.5, but 2.5%. And maybe that's conservative, but I think that's where we wanted to be. The other factor that you see here that was an important component in our projections for profitability were likely vacancy rates. A vacancy rate in a big apartment building is simply year over year. Is your building 100% occupied? That would be great. Almost never is that the case because you have turnover and that sort of thing, but you want to try to keep the vacancy rate as close to 5 or 6% as you can. We've assumed a vacancy rate of 7.5% in our projections. As you see here, the last 10 years of northern New Jersey vacancy rates for apartments built after 1990 is well below our 7.5% assumption. So we again are being conservative. If we ran our model, I'll say this again later, but if we went back and changed our model assumptions in just 2 ways, to put in rent growth at 3.5% a year and vacancies down to 5%, the internal rates of return would go up significantly. We've been conservative because this is a public-private partnership, and a lot's at stake, not just for the developer, but for the town of Westfield, to make sure that the financial structure of this deal is sound and credible because of the reliance, in part, that you're going to put on these pilot revenues to fund public improvements. I apologize for dragging you further into the weeds here, but this is maybe useful for those of you that someday want to go into real estate finance. Projected non-tax operating expenses is another important factor. A non-tax operating expense, if you own an apartment building, is all the cost of running the building except taxes. That's your insurance, your personnel, your landscaping, repairs and maintenance. All of those costs are paid out of gross rents before the landlord gets to put any money in his pocket. There's a rather clear coming together of operating costs for similar apartment projects throughout New Jersey. There's been a lot of research done on this, and I didn't want to bore you with all the details, but these numbers are typical and credible of what newer apartments cost to operate before taxes, per unit per year. We're assuming in this case for One Westfield Plaza, the 205 units that we're talking about here, about $9,300 a year before taxes or pilot. Westfield Crossing, which is under construction, is being built by a very sophisticated developer. Their operating cost projections are about $8,300 per unit. And a project that we were very much involved in supervising in Chatham, River Road redevelopment, again, undertaken by B&E, a very substantial developer. They're underway and their operating costs are roughly $9,200 a month, projected to be. So I'm comfortable with these numbers for One Westfield Plaza, also understanding that the operating costs here are going to be not incurred right away. These projects haven't been built yet, so these are all subject to the escalations that we talked about earlier. But those, I think, are credible numbers for the basis of our model. One of the final issues that we had to look at was the interest rate on the permanent loans that would be taken down to fund this project. As I indicated at the beginning of this presentation, I should have made this a little more clear. There are two parts of a financing for most real estate projects like this. There's the development phase, which is the riskiest part. It's when you build a building, you don't have any tenants for the most part if it's a residential. You build it and then lease it up, and to build it, you need to borrow what's called a construction loan. It's a short-term loan, usually 2 to 5 years in length. And the interest rate on that loan, the interest on that loan is paid during construction. And then the plan, if the project is successful, is that when the project gets built and taken to a 95% occupancy level, you will take the project to a long-term lender who will lend you enough money to not only pay off the construction loan, but fix a rate for 10 or 15 years, and maybe even give you some extra money to pay back some of the equity you had to put in during construction. Right now, the interest rates on those two kinds of loans are about the same. They're right on top of each other. They're in the 5.5% to 6% range. And that's what we've assumed at this point going. These are loans, by the way, that probably won't be taken down for 3 to 5 years. So we're having to go to a crystal ball to some extent to project what's going to happen to the capital markets in 3 to 5 years. But what we do know is that in the last 6 months, real estate loans the interest rates on real estate loans have gone down. And those of you that are in the home mortgage business may have noticed this. Home mortgages peaked about 6 or 8 months ago in rates. They've now come down a bit. They're still a lot higher than they were 2 or 3 years ago, no question about that. The other interesting factor that I've taken into account here, as I note, is that for commercial mortgages, as opposed to residential mortgages, the gold standard that most lenders use in pricing a commercial mortgage long-term loan is the price of the 10-year Treasury bond, the United States Treasury bond, and then they mark that up, usually about 2 points. So right now, the Treasury bond rate went up last fall above 4%, and it's now come down again in the last 4 or 5 months. And it shows every indication of easing a little further as we go forward. we are assuming in this case a 6% rate for the loans. And I think that's a realistic rate given what we know about the capital markets now. We also have, more conservatively than most, have assumed a debt service coverage requirement. And that's a technical term that lenders use to decide how much money they're going to loan you for a project. Before, about 2 years ago, it was customary for a long-term lender to give an apartment developer a long-term fixed-rate loan so long as the lender was comfortable that the income, the net income after expenses, would be at least 110 or 115% of the debt service. That was the cushion. That rate has gone up to 120% of debt service now. And that means less loan proceeds for the same project that you could have borrowed more for a few years ago. Again, a conservative assumption. So, with apologies for taking you into the weeds on underwriting, what do we do with all this information? The worksheets that are attached to the report that I referenced before, that are on the town's website, are designed to calculate a particular standard of feasibility called an internal rate of return on equity. And while that sounds like a fancy term, it's actually not more complicated than the decisions that any investor makes when it has a bunch of money to put to work and it has to decide where I put the money. I can put it in a treasury bond and make 3.5%, 4%. I can put it in a corporate bond and make 6%. I can put it in commodities. I can put it in a real estate project that my brother-in-law is doing and maybe make 8 or 9 or 10%. All of that is a risk assessment that has to be made based on what's the return going to be when I put my money to work in that particular investment. In the case of rental commercial real estate that's high quality, and that describes this project, rental commercial real estate that's high quality and well located, the internal rate of return on the equity investment needs to be close to 10% of the equity investment. I should have said, let me just tell you how we do the IRR, by the way. It's not as complicated as it may sound. The way you calculate an internal rate of return, and a computer can help with this, believe me, you assume that the apartment building is built, is rented up, and that it operates by the developer for 10 full years. The developer collects the rent, pays the bills. At the end of 10 years, the developer sells the building in the market, pays off his loan or her loan, and you take that net gain at the end of the 10th year and you present value that back to the day one when the equity went in, plus all the income that he got or she got during the operating period, and present value that gain back, and it gives you a percentage called the internal rate of return. You can take that calculation and compare that as a risk proposition to putting the money into a different apartment project, and that's how you decide, how investors tend to decide where to put their money. So for high-end residential and commercial projects, such as we're dealing with here, our experience in the market is that you need an internal rate of return approaching 10% in order for the project to be financially feasible and attract the equity. So here's a summary of our conclusions, which are more provided in much more detail in the report that's on file. If the project is subject to conventional taxes, and I'm talking about the consolidated project now that Steve described to you, all the different improvements, as of the date of completion of all of them, say in 2030, if the project were subject to conventional taxes, the internal rate of return would be approximately 7.45%. If the project, same project with only one difference in assumptions, was subject to the pilot agreement that I described earlier, the rate of return would be 9.7%. In my opinion, that's a substantial increase and is a rate of return that is, while at the low end of what is required, is capable of attracting the investment that's needed to build this project. It's also a level of return.
Can I just ask a quick question? With conventional taxes, you should indicate that money is guaranteed to the school system. In the pilot side, that's all projections. So if you just want to elaborate on that.
Right, we'll get to that. So the conclusion is that, in my opinion, if the project is subject to conventional taxes, I don't think it's feasible. It will have great difficulty raising the funds that are needed and most likely won't be built. Just to wrap up, as I indicated earlier, the additional benefit of the pilot agreement, beyond having the project getting built and having the benefits, is the financial revenue that will be generated by the project over the period of time that the chart showed, roughly 30 years. It'll generate in excess of $213 million in net pilot revenues and land taxes to the town, or a little over $7 million per year. And that's before any of the debt service and so forth on the bonds is paid. So that is a summary of the analysis we did and our conclusions.
Matt Jessup to talk about the bonds and financing. Thank you, and then we'll obviously bring you back for questions at the conclusion. Thanks.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I know that you've been through two thorough presentations so far, and Jim, since I noticed none of these televisions have the Villanova basketball game on, I'm going to try and be as efficient as I can with the remaining time here. The 8 urban renewal entities that Steve mentioned earlier collectively filed an application for a tax abatement. That application has been submitted to the mayor, and ultimately the mayor, pursuant to the long-term tax exemption law, provided a letter along with the application to the governing body recommending that the governing body favorably consider the application. You have a resolution tonight for consideration that would approve the application, which again is a requirement under the long-term tax exemption law, before you can move forward to memorializing the terms of the pilot or the annual service charge that is requested in that application. I know you've done financial agreements before. You know that they are the document that memorializes the term of the pilot between the town and, in this case, each of the 8 redeveloper urban renewal entities. The entities are paying a pilot on the improvements only. The term is 30 years, which is standard in New Jersey for financial agreements of this type for these projects. And each term commences upon certificate of occupancy for that particular project. So I think, as Steve mentioned earlier, you're going to have the 8 projects coming online at different times, beginning in 2027 under the current timetable, and then spread out over a couple of years during ramp up. While there are 8 financial agreements with 8 different UREs, the terms are all the same. The pilot is 13% of annual gross revenue for the first 5 years, 14% for the next in year 6 through 15, and 15% for the last of the 15 years. And as Bob mentioned earlier, annual gross revenue is just that. It is gross revenue. This is not a percentage of profit of the developer. While we want the developer to succeed because we want the project to succeed, our pilot is not reliant on profit. It's reliant on gross revenues. When these entities make their pilot payment, they do first get a credit against the pilot for the amount of land taxes that they've paid. That is statutory. It's in the long-term tax exemption law. So this developer, like every other developer that pays conventional land taxes in connection with a redevelopment project like this, they do receive a credit. So the pilot number does come down by virtue of the amount of land taxes that are paid. And in this particular case, the redeveloper will pay their land taxes on the Lord and Taylor property as they do now throughout the term of the financial agreement. And when they take down the north and south land, they'll begin paying conventional real estate taxes on the land there. And that payment will again also continue for the life of the tax exemption. While the improvements are exempt from paying taxes and are paying a pilot instead, that does not exempt the developer from paying any other municipal charges. I understand from the other discussion, they'll have a sewer service bill, right, that they're gonna have to pay. If they're part of the downtown bid, they will have special assessments that they have to pay. Any of the traditional municipal services, they are not exempt from paying those. They do have to pay those in addition to paying their pilot and their land taxes. The redevelopment agreement also the financial agreement also has a provision in it regarding net profits and excess net profits. And excess net profits, if any, are paid over to the town as an additional annual service charge. That's in the agreement. I don't want people to get too excited about that. In my 20 years, and I'd be willing to add Bob and Steve's combined experience, we never see developers achieve that excess net profit. So there is a computation. We're happy to take you through it. It's in the agreement because it's in the long-term tax exemption law, but we generally do not see projects over the 30-year term meet the requirements under statute to have to pay excess net profits. And importantly, amounts due under the financial agreements are a lien on the property. They are a first municipal lien. They are ahead of any other non-municipal lien, including the construction loan that you just heard Bob Powell talk about, and any other lien that comes after it. The town, of course, can enforce for the failure to pay, and it's akin to any other property owner not paying their real estate taxes. It's subject to the tax sale that you do at the end of every year, so the proceeds can be generated. It's subject to foreclosure by the town if the town holds the lien in 6 months, or by a private purchaser if a private purchaser buys it 2 years later. In addition to the financial agreements you have for consideration tonight on first reading only, 8 special assessment agreements, also with each of the 8 Streetworks urban renewal entities. The town is imposing a special assessment on each of those properties and projects pursuant to those agreements. And I know we've talked about this before. The reason we're doing this is the town is going to be issuing bonds or proposing to issue bonds to fund public improvements in 3 tranches. When those bonds get issued are very tightly sequenced to the project being constructed by Streetworks. The town can't issue the first set of bonds until certain progress has been made by Streetworks on the West Zone. Nonetheless, that bond issue for the North Parking Garage will be issued by the town prior to pilots from the West Zone being fully online and paid in an amount sufficient to pay debt service on those bonds. That issue solved in 2 ways. First, those bonds will have capitalized interest, where there'll be an interest fund funded to pay debt service for the first 3 years. And second, the special assessment. So if pilots come online later than expected because of construction problems, if pilots come online slower than expected because the rent up period takes longer than expected, if the rental rates that you just heard Bob Powell talk about and validate don't end up being the rental rates, the rates are 20, 30% less. If any of those things happen and the pilot isn't sufficient to pay debt service on the bonds, the special assessment kicks in to cover the shortfall, and the redeveloper has to make that payment in lieu of paying whatever the additional delta on the pilot would have been. The special assessment on the 5 West Zone projects will secure debt service on the North Parking Garage bonds, and the special assessment on the 3 North and South Zone projects will secure debt service due on the south parking garage bonds and the remaining sort of the third tranche of public improvement bonds. These special assessments do have the opportunity to terminate. If they terminate, it's because of basically success of the project. So with both special assessments, the West Zone and the North-South, respectively, if pilots plus the town share of land taxes, which are the project revenues you've seen in prior reports and presentations, if the amount paid by the respective entities are at least equal to 115% of debt service on the bonds for 3 full calendar years, then the project is deemed to have been stabilized and is performing at expectations. And at that point, the special assessment will burn off. And then the pilots will be the remaining security feature for the town to use to repay debt service on the bonds. The measuring period for determining whether or not a special assessment due is going to be done twice per year, 4 months before each debt service payment. So we're going to look at cash that's already been received versus debt service due 4 months later. And if there's a shortfall, the special assessment payment has to be made 3 months ahead of debt service on the bonds. So we're not doing this retroactively. We're not doing it based on projections of what revenue may come in. We're only doing it based on cash in the door versus our next debt service bill. If we have more than enough money, no special assessment is due. If we're short, a payment is due, and it's due 3 months ahead of the debt service the debt service date. If one or more special assessments are made, there is an opportunity for the developer down the road to potentially recover that via a credit against the pilot. What has to happen there, in short, first, the project has to be successful enough that the special assessment terminates, right? They've met that 115% test for 3 full years. And then during the next 3 years after that, so now you're 6 years down the road, essentially, if the pilot paid by the developer is more than what was projected today in numbers that everybody has for that same 3-year period, then they can recover through those excess pilots an amount up to their special assessment, or the amount of the pilot, whichever is less, obviously. Like the financial agreement and the pilot, the special assessment payments are a municipal lien on the property and the project. Again, failure to pay a special assessment payment, same thing as failure to pay a pilot, same thing as failure for a property owner like you or me to fail to pay our real estate taxes. It's a first lien. It's ahead of the construction loan and any other liens on the property, and it's subject to enforcement via sale to collect the revenue and or foreclosure. Importantly, as you heard Steve talk about with 8 different entities and multiple agreements, there are cross-default provisions across these agreements, right? So if an entity were to default under the special assessment agreement, it's also a default under the financial agreement and vice versa. So there is some excess enforcement mechanisms there. Finally, you have before you a bond ordinance that authorizes the issuance of not to exceed $57 million in general obligation redevelopment area bonds to fund the public improvements that Steve walked you through earlier. To be clear, the town is not issuing any of these bonds today. We're not issuing any of these bonds next month or even a year from now. As I mentioned earlier, the first series of bonds can't be issued by the town, cannot be issued by the town until Streetworks achieves certain milestones on the West Zone to ensure that the West Zone project is up and running to a point that we feel comfortable issuing those bonds. That's right now projected to be early 2025, so still 2 years away before the first series of bonds are issued. And with those triggers, we're also not borrowing until our parking deck is basically shovel ready, right? So we're not borrowing money in advance of when we need it. We're not paying interest on bonds in advance of when we need the proceeds. So we have approximately $54 million of public improvements. These improvements are funded from the $8 million Streetworks cash contribution, which comes in before we issue any bonds. the $5.55 million portion of the town's land sale proceeds, which is 1/2 of the $11.1 million purchase price that Steve took you through earlier, and then the balance via the town bonds. The current estimated cost of those public improvements is $54.2 million. That's inclusive of a 20+% contingency, soft cost, performance and payment bonds, et cetera. I know we've been through that budget once or twice before. The bond ordinance is effectively a not to exceed amount in the event one or more of the costs come in higher than anticipated, right? Which certainly can happen. Some will come in higher, some are gonna come in lower, some are gonna come in, right around where they are. That's just sort of inevitable. The town is devoting up to 80% of the first year stabilized pilot in debt service to pay for those public improvements. That number computes to be about $3.66 million. So the cap on the town's debt service across the 3 series of bonds is $3.66 million. We can't issue more bonds than an amount that produces that debt service at whatever the applicable interest rate is. If the cap is reached, and for some reason there isn't enough money to complete all the improvements, then the town has the discretion to pull certain improvements off the list in order to afford them. But based on today's cost of $54.2 million, which again has a significant escalation cost in it to get us to the future, the town is looking to issue approximately $43.7 million worth of bonds. Taking advantage of the town's strong AAA credit support, which does allow the interest rate to be as low as possible, which allows for more pilot revenue to be available for other town purposes. The interest rates today are in the low to mid 3% range. As you all know here, all the modeling has been assuming 4%, and 4% is how you get to that $3.66 million cap. Order of magnitude, the bonds at 3.25%, which I know is a little higher than even a rate I quoted you on a comparable deal priced just 2 months ago. That puts total debt service at $2.6 million, which provides about another $5.5 million worth of pilot revenues to the town that are not reflected in any of the schedules. We're not, of course, relying on that level of financing, but I wanted to just give you a sense of what it would look like if those bonds were issued today. And importantly, and finally, the town is only borrowing the amount necessary, subject to the cap, to complete those improvements. So, as I said, today it's about $43 million. The bond ordinance is not to exceed $57 million. That delta is canceled and is not used for any other purpose in connection with the redevelopment project. So the town is only issuing bonds to fund the cost of the public improvements up to the cap. Any remaining amount over and above the not to exceed amount that's been authorized would be canceled. And I'm not sure who's taking us through this. Yep, I think so.
Excellent. So I think just as we mentioned, tonight, obviously, we're voting on 2 resolutions and introducing the 3 finance ordinances we referenced. On March 14th, there's going to be a public hearing and a vote on those 3 ordinances. And there's also going to be a resolution to approve the additional bond details and the PFA agreement, as Steve mentioned. And then we anticipate, if this moves forward, that it'll get in front of the planning board late this year with anticipated start of construction late in '24. So with that, I'm gonna open it up to the council for any questions for our professionals.
Can I ask Matt a question about bonds? Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I should have just had you stay up there. So I just want to clarify, unlike general obligation bonds, can a town or can Westfield issue RABs that are not backed by the full faith and credit clause? Or can you talk a little bit about that?
I can, certainly. So, yes, redevelopment area bonds can be issued with essentially one of 3 different, or a combination of 3 different securities behind it. One is the full faith and credit of the underlying municipality, which you just mentioned, and which is being proposed here. One is bonds that are secured solely by the pilot payments being made by the developer. And the third is special assessment payments. I would say not in the form that we are using them, but often in a more traditional recurring payment scheduled like a pilot and meant to be used to pay debt service on the bonds. Any one or more of those three can be used under the RAB law to secure bonds. The issue with bonds secured solely by pilots or solely by special assessments is that in New Jersey, there is no defined market to go out and sell those bonds the way the town does, for example, when they sell their own bonds to fund general capital projects. And as a result of that, buyers are scarce and interest rates are high. So in a circumstance like this, where you have one of your greatest assets is the town's credit strength and the ability to deliver bonds at a low interest rate, driving down debt service and allowing for more pilot revenue to the municipality for whatever future use this governing body determines, that is a strength relative to not utilizing that, paying an interest rate that could be twice the rate on the bonds, if not more, that you would pay if your full faith credit was behind it, and effectively lose another $20, $25, $30 million worth of pilot revenue to bondholders instead of having that money in-house.
Councilman Hupkey?
Yes, Matt, would you mind just talking a little bit about the, so in follow-on to Councilwoman Root's question and your answer about why we would, in this case, we're thinking about going forward with general obligation redevelopment area bonds. It was structured in a way to protect the town in a lot of different ways so that we would never end up in a situation where we wouldn't have enough money to cover the principal and interest on the bonds. You went through a lot of them tonight. Steve Malenik went through them as well. But the idea here was to take advantage of the AAA bond rating so that we could borrow as cheaply as possible and put a bunch of tests into these agreements so that we would never be even starting the process of bonding until we knew with a very wide margin that there would be sufficient monies to cover the debt service. So it starts out with the special assessment, protections. You went through on a slide tonight how long that special assessment can stay in place. So that never falls off until you reach a point where the project has stabilized and has covered the principal and interest payments by 115% for 3 consecutive years. And that means, I just want to confirm a couple of things with you, that at any point, if in year 2, the revenue coming in falls below expectation, then the clock starts again. And so you then hold on to that special assessment for another 3 years. So if we have a situation where revenues start to take a left turn and don't sort of follow the patterns that are expected in the work that we did, there's an ongoing protection against a situation where the monies coming in don't cover the principal and interest payments on the bonds.
Right, so I think 2 great points there. One is absolutely correct. In order for the special assessment to burn off, you do have to have 3 consecutive years of achieving that 115% or better debt service coverage. If they miss it at any given point, that 3-year clock does start over. And while I think we all certainly hope and expect, and the model bears out, that special assessment will burn off relatively quickly, because that 115% turns to 150% very quickly, and it turns to 200% very quickly. If they never achieve that, the special assessment sits there forever, right, for the life of the bonds. Again, that's not something anybody wants, because the project as it is built is intended to be far more successful than that. But if that were to be the case, then the special assessment would continue to sit out there as an additional protection for the town.
And that's in addition to the fact that the bonds are never issued until a very long laundry list of tests are met related to the construction on the west zone, and also related to the amount of money that the redeveloper has already invested in the project. So it's a lot of money and time and evidence that we'll have before we would even contemplate taking out bonds to finance the north garage. I have if you look at the PIFA agreement, there's a, I can't remember.
Yeah, it's government approvals for the North Garage Bond, a GMP for the North Garage Bond, governmental approvals for the Lord and Taylor office building and the first residential building, 100% of the loans necessary for those two buildings, 100% of the equity necessary for those two buildings. Footings and foundations have to be in and inspected for those two buildings. And on top of all of that, Streetworks has to have spent $18 million in hard costs in addition to the umpteen million in soft costs to date on that project before the town moves forward with the first series of bonds to fund the north deck. Yep. And then there's a second series of triggers similar to those that we can run through for the south garage bonds.
Right. So are you comfortable with this?
Well, I'm not a voter, right? I don't,
I know.
I mean, but I'm a
you've seen it,
taxpayer
but
and I'm
you've
here,
seen-
right?
You're a
So,
Westfield resident taxpayer.
yeah,
Right.
you know,
And you've seen a lot of deals in the work that you've done.
Right.
And so it's, in my experience doing project finance deals and, talking to a lot of people, including all of you who have worked on this, there's a lot of protections here and a lot of opportunities for us to take a different, path or hold up a situation if we felt like there was ever a situation where we would be bonding and not be covered, principal and interest-wise on the bonds from the payment stream that will come in from the pilot payments or the special assessment.
yeah, and I think one of the things that's important, right, is risk mitigation is critical, risk analysis is critical, right? So there's 8 different components. And everybody can have a different view on which ones may be successful or which ones may not be successful. But when you do run through that risk mitigation analysis and you contemplate the Lord and Taylor office and the first south office building never, ever being above 50% occupancy, and the second south office building never, ever getting built, and the residential never being above 60% occupancy, you're still seeing a model that has $50 million in excess pilot revenue over and above debt service of $70 million, right? So, is that the worst case scenario? I don't know. Could an office building, I mean, the office building has to be at least 50% leased just to be constructed in the first place. So I think when you run through whichever iterations you want of things being empty for time periods or 50% empty for time periods, including for life, for the 30-year term, you're still seeing numbers that are significant relative to the debt service.
I think I remember you saying, Matt, if we'd ever get to that point, we have much bigger things to worry about as a country.
Well, I mean, look, the residential market is what it is, right? And so we all know it. This is a phenomenal community. If the residential alone can support the majority of this. And so if people aren't living in these units, there's something else going on in town.
Thank you. Anyone else? Katz?
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Powell.
Mayor, can I ask a quick question?
Sure, Councilman. Yes. Wait, we can't hear you. Hang on, Councilman, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I know there's a delay, but.
Okay, now we go. All right, we'll just be quiet. Yes.
Talk about what. I'm sorry, but just on that point, Matt, you talked to us about that the lenders that Streetworks will need to borrow money from will also bring their own specific requirements. And I think it'd be valuable for the public to hear what you would expect their lenders to require that supplements all of the conservativity and the mitigation that you built into our agreement.
Did you get that, Matt?
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
start, but you can
Yeah.
stay close
Sorry,
by, Bob, if
sorry,
you
Bob.
want. So yes, Councilman, I mean, that's a really good point. Not only has the town's professional team been vetting the Streetworks pro forma, and obviously you heard Bob go through that in great detail. Streetworks has presented a model and represented that it is accurate. Architects have certified project costs, and in addition to all the safeguards that we have, there are going to be multiple lenders. There are going to be multiple equity investors, all of whom have credit committees, all of whom, evaluate projects like this on a daily basis for a living, and none of whom generally like to lend money if they're not going to get it back, right? So I think there are a lot of things that tend to be self-policing in these projects. It doesn't mean that the municipality shouldn't police them as well. But absolutely, especially a project of this size, of this type, of this scope, there are going to be dozens of credit committees that are going to have to review and approve these projects independent of each other in order to see them get off the ground, and they have to get off the ground before we're issuing our bonds. So I think there is some comfort there, and I don't know if Bob has anything else to add to that or not, but.
Yeah, let me just add a couple of more specific levels of comfort that I think you can take by the fact that there's probably going to be a half a dozen construction loans, or maybe more, 8 or 10 construction loans done for this project. Having been in my career through several hundred construction financings, some as principal and some as a consultant, I can tell you that there are a couple of things that pretty much always happen in order for a borrower to get a construction loan for a project like this. There will need to be a deep underwriting of a liquidity of the borrower, the borrowing entity. Liquidity means not only just assets, but how much cash, marketable securities does the borrower have in case something goes sideways. It's not enough if the borrower owns a whole bunch of properties in a foreign country. We want to know as lender, could you get your hands on $15 million if you needed it? It's also particularly common in a case like this, in the environment that we've been in for the last several years, that there will be guarantees required of the borrowers during the construction phase for completion of the project, guarantees to fund cost overruns of the project, and at the end of the construction financing period, if the borrower is not able to take the construction lender out because the project has not achieved a level of cash flow that allows a new lender to come in, that's when the construction lender will probably get pretty cranky about wanting the loan paid off and paid off rather quickly. It's a rigorous process that winnows out generally inexperienced, undercapitalized developers. Construction lenders have learned the hard way over the years, especially in the 2008, 2010 process, that you better know a lot about your borrowers before you start loaning them money. The permanent loan process is not nearly as rigorous financially. Those loans tend to be booked often in a non-recourse basis, which means that if you build your apartment building or you build your office building and you get it to a stabilized occupancy rate and you have good tenants and good cash flow, it's not uncommon for a developer who had to guarantee the construction loan to get the permanent loan funded with no guarantees, no recourse, and the permanent lender's only collateral is the asset. But that asset now is an income-producing property in a strong location and the permanent lender goes in with its eyes wide open. And these are very sophisticated companies, obviously, that do this. So it's a terrific question because the standards that have to be achieved to go through a municipal process are pretty high, and you're seeing some of that here tonight. The standards that are going on behind the scenes will be even more rigorous financially in terms of the underwriting that's going to happen.
Thank you, Bob. Actually, let me ask Councilman LaGrepo, do you mind?
Thank you very much.
Oh, no, I know Councilman that asked questions previously. Okay, Councilman Katz and then Councilman
Yeah,
LaGrepo. How's that?
so-
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Mr. Powell, so based on the model, the 9.7% IRR with the pilot versus the 7.4% IRR without the pilot, you deducted that the project would not be feasible to proceed without the pilot. I've heard a lot of people that, residents that oppose the project say that they like the western zones or they approve of the western zone projects, but they're not that happy with the north-south zones project. So could you speak to the feasibility of just the west zone projects as a standalone project based on the model without the north and south zone projects? And then further, would those three western zones be feasible without a pilot? So.
The models that we have done, actually, I've given you the consolidated IRRs. Let me just pull up, excuse me, just a minute, let me just grab a file. We have broken out the internal rates of return for the west zone by itself and the north-south zone by itself. And the return in the west zone was much lower. It's about 7.2% compared to the blended return that I mentioned earlier, which was 7.4 at conventional taxes. So I certainly have my doubts about whether a standalone West Zone project undertaken by Streetworks, subject to conventional taxes, and nothing happening in the North-South Zone, separate and complete development opportunity. I have my doubts about whether that project would be built by Streetworks.
Well, with that said, I mean, Hudson Bay did buy all the Lord and Taylor properties for their real estate, so it sounds ridiculous to say they wouldn't develop it. But besides all that,
Well, let me make it's a good point. Let me just, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I should have said one other thing. Hudson Bay, Streetworks owns a very valuable piece of real estate over there now. No question about it. My conclusions that I just summarized for you about a return on investment are based on the improvements that are in the redevelopment plan for the West Zone. There's no question that if this project got split into two parts and the West Zone was not in a redevelopment area and it simply came back to the town and said, we're not going to do a redevelopment, but we need to rezone it for something, they would have to come back and rezone it, and they would try to come up with a project that generated more revenue compared to cost, not as complicated. There might be a big retail store there. I've said to the mayor a couple of times, it's a building that would be great to subdivide between a Best Buy and a Staples. Simple, clean, $40 a foot in rent. Little or no housing, call it a day.
but they
That
would
could
be,
probably be done at conventional taxes.
right, they would be conventional taxes.
Yeah.
But earlier you said land taxes were not exempt from this plan, so how much taxes will the property be paying in land?
That should be somewhere in my, let me back
I
up.
actually have that, Bob.
Do you have it, Mayor?
I do. Land taxes, on their site, total land taxes, let's see. Oh, sure, I have that. I think it's, the Lord and Taylor land tax is $138,000.
The land portion.
Land
That'll
portion,
be what they're paying.
139, yeah.
So basically, everybody in this room will be paying more in school taxes than streetworks, but besides that, in the past, you've done a great job explaining how schools are funded with conventional taxes versus pilot. If you could just tell the public in 30 seconds as far as how the schools will be funded with the pilots versus, obviously Westfield has a great school system and people move here for the school system. So I hear from many residents concerned about the future of the schools here in Westfield.
Well, this might be an appropriate time for me to flip over to the appendix.
Yeah, you know, I'm happy to take this too, Bob,
Okay.
because I think it's obviously a question that's come up by a lot, so I don't know if you wanna, you can go ahead. I mean, I think it's important to set everybody's understanding of school enrollment. No, go back, I'm sorry, Bob. School enrollment, and school enrollment has down 400,000 students since 2015. And this was a trend that actually had started prior to COVID. And so I think that's just one important thing in the level set, because people think that schools are getting a lot more crowded, and actually that's not the case. And as a reminder, as we said before, our population is lower today than it was in 1970. So I think that's just an important fact. So if you want to go to the next page, and I think this is Bob, you can help walk through this. This is just a really important point to your point, and just to be very clear about the schools and what people, this misunderstanding about schools is schools are always paid. We all agree on that. Schools are paid first. Schools always get what they ask for in terms of the budget. They pay first. We are the town is the tax collector. The schools give us a quarterly bill and we pay it. The county gets paid second, and then the town is last. So there's this notion that the pilot is gonna diminish what the schools get is untrue. But what is the concern is that is gonna come off the tax rolls, and taxpayers are gonna be making up the difference for can we all agree on that that's the concern? There's not a concern that schools don't get paid. The concern is that the taxpayer makes up the difference at the expense of the developer. That we're all in agreement on that.
100%.
Okay, so if you look at this chart up here, the top part actually details the 4 projects that have been completed, beginning with 333 Central. None of these are pilot projects. It just gives an understanding of what the ratables went from pre and post development for these 4 projects. So they've increased $540,000 in ratables for the schools, and $180,000 for the town. And those 4 projects, which is 151 units, have contributed 16 kids. It comes out to be about an incremental $35,000 a kid on ratables, and I think their current funding mechanism is about $15,000. So our projects are over delivering ratables in terms of the number of kids that they're delivering. So it's also important to note, when everybody worries and complains about apartments and kids, these apartment buildings are delivering more ratables as a percentage than school children. And that's a fact, and those 16 numbers come directly from the school district, 16 kids. So then you take a look at the Lord and Taylor site. The pre-development, this is just the school taxes, is $337,000.
Let me just interrupt and say,
Yeah.
right now, the Lord and Taylor site is generating about $530,000 in real
In
estate
total,
taxes,
correct.
of which 337 is allocated to.
Yes, that's exactly
school.
right.
Right.
This is not including the county portion in any of
Correct.
this. It's a total of about $560,000, of which, yes, $337,000 is for what the schools portion would be of that ratables. To your point, Councilman LaGrippo, the land taxes still get paid at a conventional rate. So the Lord and Taylor site, the school portion of that land tax of the $138,000 you mentioned is $84,000. And so you could say there's $253,000 that are coming off the tax rolls for the schools. But what is coming on the tax rolls is this municipal lots that currently deliver zero tax revenue. And also, a big portion of what's going on these tax rolls is not delivering anything that's delivering kids, including office space. So when you add back the tax space, what's coming off the tax rolls, arguably the ratables for the schools, is $109,000 in total. Now, if you look to the right of this in terms of what's coming on to the town because of the pilot, it's coming to an average of $7.1 million a year, as Bob mentioned previously, for an incremental benefit, annual benefit to the town of $7 million. That $109,000 off the rolls is 0.09% of the $110 million school tax levy. And at the end of the day, we're all taxpayers. When you pay your tax bill, you don't write a check to the schools, you don't write a check to the county, you don't write a check to the town. You write one check, and all you know every year if your taxes are going up or down. So if you're in a position where the schools are really relatively flat on this, but the town is bringing in over $7 million, I think we're pretty well set to compensate for anything that might come off the tax rolls for the schools. And just on that note, we have been in constant conversations with the school district. And as I've said numerous times, the very first meeting that Jim Gilday and I had on September 21st, which was the day after Streetworks was in this chamber presenting, was with the school district. Specifically to understand what their capital needs and desires were for the future, to see how the town could collaborate with them to bring them to fruition. And we have agreed that we will put together a working group to help understand what those capital needs are. You will not find a bigger proponent for full-day kindergarten than me. And so the plan, and it's important to remember that these pilot dollars don't kick in till 2030. So it's hard for us to say in 7 years, when this pilot is stabilized, what the landscape is going to look like, both with the school budget and with ours. So I think we feel really comfortable that we are in a great position to be able to offset anything that comes off the tax rolls for the schools, and also with a firm understanding and appreciation that the school district is certainly one of the top reasons why people move here, beyond that in our downtown. So I hope this puts it in perspective about the taxes and what's coming off. And as to go back to where Bob started, it's important to note this project would not be built without a pilot. So you can't sit there and talk about conventional taxes lost, because it would never happen if conventional taxes were paid. So I hope that clarifies things and puts people a bit at ease regarding schools.
Can I just finish with Bob? Bob, thank you. One point, just speaking to people around the state of New Jersey, all the way down from Trenton up to Bergen County, the one thing you hear is the pilots are always overinflated. They never reach their full potential. And, you know, what the mayor said is true, but we're gambling away our future on pilots. I mean, what's your feeling that these pilots really, I mean, I know people did ask for the model. I've seen emails. I don't think the model was disclosed to residents who understand the finances and could actually come up with the numbers that you did. But, you know, why wasn't that model released, or what's your feeling on projections of what have you seen in other places around the state? I know you said you're doing this 30 years.
My experience has been around the state that, especially in northern New Jersey suburbs, and certainly in places like Jersey City and Newark, pilots are generating at least as much, if not more, revenue than they were projected to generate. And the reason, at least in the last 10 years, is that so-called experts like me tend to underestimate the growth in rent in places like Westfield.
Overestimate,
Underestimate.
underestimate.
That's to underestimate. I'm estimating that the rents in these buildings that are gonna be hopefully put up in Westfield are gonna go up, as I told you earlier, about 2.5% a year.
Now,
There has never been a time in the last 10 years when apartment rents did not go up at least 3.5%. And they were going up 5% of the last 3 or 4 years. So, and that's the way we ought to project these things. But your question was, are we over-promising the revenues?
Well, I mean, that
I don't think-
overpromising, just, you know, from what you see in the models as far as, is, from what you talk, from talking to people around the state, whatever pilots or forecasts, it doesn't normally meet the demands of what's predicted in the long term. So in 20 years, no one's gonna say back on February 28th, 2023, you know, we voted on this and,
Councilman, I would love to know the specific towns, because I talk to mayors
Yeah.
all over the state all the time. And I have not heard that experience from one mayor I've spoken to, and I've spoken to a lot. So it would be really helpful if you could be specific with the towns where they haven't been successful.
okay. Yeah, so that's, I mean, that's when, speaking to people, developers around this state, that's,
we're advisors to the city of Hoboken, which has done so many pilots that they're not sure they want to keep doing them. And I
well,
recently-
Jersey City did, right? They did it with.
Jersey
pilots.
City's, and if you, in both of those towns, I'd be happy to follow
Yeah,
up
that's
with you
fine.
on
I
this.
just-
I wanted to show you, and the point I'm about to make is that I'd like to show you the municipal property tax rates in Jersey City and Hoboken, property tax rates for the last 10 years. They're dropping. And these are two cities that have substantial social service needs. And it's because of the pilots.
And
Now,
I'll just add to that, because I did meet with the mayor of Jersey City, specifically about this project and understand their pilots, and they have built 11 charter schools, I think, with their redevelopment agreements. And another thing that's really interesting in Westfield, you know, 60% of our taxes goes to the schools, as we now know, and only 16% goes to the municipality. In Jersey City, they only give like a third of the 30% to the schools. When I told him that Westfield only got 16% of the tax dollars from municipality, he nearly fell out of his chair. He was like, how on earth do you guys provide the services to your constituents at 16%? It's not even possible. And that's exactly right.
Well, the town survived 200 years, so I mean, something was done right.
So, but my point being is, in absence of other sources, you know, we're just going to relegate ourselves to often, in municipal amenities and so forth, to being mediocre in terms of the, you know, infrastructure and sidewalks and parks and things that are worth doing for our residents.
the plain math that Matt sort of laid out for you about these numbers is that over the 30-year period, you're going to take in, we project, $213 million of pilot revenues. You're going to allocate about $70 million of that to these bonds. $150 million of it, take 80% of that, take 50% of that, $75 million of that money is coming right to the municipal budgets, and will, in all likelihood, all things being equal, lower property tax rates in Westfield.
Well, history will show, but just real quick, what's the vacancy rate for residents and commercial now in Westfield?
I don't have the numbers on Westfield, but you have the numbers that we have from CoStar for the 3 counties that Westfield's in, which don't include, which are Union, Somerset, and Morris counties. So that's a pretty good indication of what the vacancy rates are.
But do we know what, in Westfield, we don't know what the vacancy rate is?
I don't know what the vacancy rates are. I don't know, I mean, I don't know whether CoStar covers you have some apartments that were built before 1990, I assume, which are probably not even covered in the survey.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yep.
Councilman, if I could just mention too, because you made the point about Nassau Capital Advisors financial model being available. It's part of their report that's up on the website.
Okay, because I've seen, residents asking for the model.
Yeah, no, and it's there, and it couldn't be made available to them until the application for the tax rebate was final, so that those numbers could be final, and so the financial information could be released, so,
Thank you.
yeah.
Just a quick comment. First of all, I actually, Mark, I'm sorry, I disagree with you on the residents paying the more school taxes. And I agree with the mayor's analysis on this, is that I think what this does, it actually puts the town in the position of being able to partner with the BOE where appropriate, to help fund capital projects that the BOE just could not fund without significant increases of taxes, a regular tax rate, to the residents. And so that puts, I think that's why this is actually a benefit to the schools and not a detriment. I've got actually a corollary to Scott's question. I'm not sure whether this is a Bob question or a Matt question, but just kind of looking at this more broadly, is this project an example of an instance where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts? There's been a lot of discussion and a lot of commentary about this notion of, for example, why don't we bid out the parking lots to individual developers? Why don't we slow down and do this one project at a time? Why don't we allow, Streetworks to do the Lord and Taylor property, developer B to do one of the parking lots, developer C to do one of the other parking lots? And incidentally, actually, seeing the 333 Central number up there kind of reminds me of something, just to the extent that there's actually precedent for the town giving a developer rights to actually town property. I think if everyone remembers, there used to be a street running right down the middle of 333 Central, and the town, this was back probably 10 to 12 to 15 years ago, actually exchanged that street for an additional lane on South Avenue. So there is actually recent precedent for turning over municipal property to a developer. But just aside from that, in other words, if we were to insist on developing this project in a piecemeal fashion, would we be able to achieve the anticipated 30-year revenue of $213 million or more, depending on how the project performs? Would we be able to obtain the level of public improvements, $54 million worth of public improvements, A, that level, B, within a short time period? Would we be able to obtain the kinds of safeguards from a hodgepodge of developers, like the special assessment, like the liens on the properties and everything like that? If we were to develop this one parcel at a time, rather than this more of a global project as we're proceeding here, would we be able to obtain and achieve all the benefits, in your view, that we're able to and that we're predicting right now? And I don't know whether that's a Bob or a Matt question, but
I hope we have the same reaction. I think the way you phrased it is exactly correct. Based on my experience in developing smaller pieces of downtown properties all over New Jersey, it's very difficult to take a one-site development and start imposing on that developer a series of open space requirements, traffic improvements, landscape improvements, and contributions to things that the town has long wanted to accomplish, because it doesn't make any sense financially for the developer to do that. What you're putting together here is a whole piece of cloth for downtown renewal. You've put into motion, it will be putting into motion a series of initiatives that will invest that will result in not just $350 or $80 million of private capital being invested in the town, but another $50 million being invested in public purpose improvements. And that's all possible because we have 8 different components of this project that are generating pilot revenues on a similar time frame. So the taxpayers aren't going to have to carry that burden of the $54 million of public improvement debt. It's smart. That's all I can tell you. It's smart. And the result will be a downtown that's quite healthy and vibrant. Just as a quick anecdote, and I'll let my colleague Bob Goldsmith jump in on this if he wants. I worked very closely with the mayor and council in Morristown on the M Station office development that's going forward now. It's a 400 and some thousand square foot, 2-part modern office space. I cited one of the first building's been leased, 128,000 feet, has been leased to Deloitte. Bob was at a reception recently with the chairman of Deloitte, who was in Morristown, because Bob's very involved in Morristown, who said they're very happy with the space, and his personnel people just told him that among the new employees that they've brought into this space, 18 of them have rented new apartments downtown in Morristown. And they're just now filling the building up. And you know the rest of them are going to go out to dinner and they're going to shop because it's right in the middle of town. And it's exactly why Deloitte wanted to do this. They will now be able to get people to come to work who would rather stay at home remotely. But now this will be a far more attractive place for young people especially to come to work. That's part of the genius of bringing together the office component and the residential component and the public improvements all in one whole piece of cloth. I think you're exactly right.
All right, thanks, Bob.
First of all, thank you all. Really appreciate your presentation tonight. I think this is a question for Matt, what I want to cite here comes from the financial agreement memo that we all received. So in it says on page 2, each entity is subject to a limitation of its profits pursuant to the exemption law. Any profits in excess of this limitation are paid to the town as an additional pilot payment. So I think it would be really important for the public to understand what that means. So if you could just expand on that a bit.
I'm happy to do that, Councilman. Again, as I may have mentioned earlier, I have yet to see a project where that provision was actually utilized and there was an excess profit generated and paid to a municipality in the form of an additional annual service charge. So that is in because the law requires it. You are statutorily protected with that. But again, you're not going to see any data up on the screens with an additional annual service charge based on excess net profits because there should be no expectation that it will be met. Nonetheless, the statute does provide an allowable profit rate for the developer. That profit rate is effectively 12% or if higher, 1.25% plus their construction mortgage rate, right? Which at this point would likely be a lower number. So call it the 12% number. The reason that you generally don't see excess profits ultimately paid, even though they may be earned, is because the test is cumulative over the full 30-year period. And what you're going to see is that any development will have losses in the early years. And those losses are allowed, since it's a cumulative test, to be carried forward. And so future profits are first allowed to offset the losses before the ultimate profit number is measured against that profit limitation. So if for some reason the development does exceed the excess profit limitation, then at the end of the 30-year term, the town could see an additional annual service charge equal to the excess net profits. Again, because of the cumulative nature of that calculation over the full 30-year term, I don't think any of us should put it in the budget and plan to spend it yet.
And Matt, just to follow up, I don't know if it's you or Steve, what the mechanism, the audit requirement, like how, what is the process for that and how does it work?
Yeah, each URE has to submit an audit within 90 days of the close of its fiscal year. And that's gonna be important
For the entire term of the pilot?
For the entire term of the pilot, correct. And that's important for a couple reasons. One, the pilot payment is a percentage of annual gross revenue, right? We want to see through an audit what the actual amount of annual gross revenue is that's paid every year, so that the town can, validate the math and confirm that 13% of the amount that's stated in the audit is the number that the town collected in the prior year. Similarly, the excess net profit test is required to be included in the audit as well. So the town will get to see and keep a running track of whether or not the excess net profit test is met. So the town will see annually the performance of each entity every single year, beginning the first year after the financial agreement is effective for that particular entity.
Can I just add one quick thing to that, Mayor, just as this may be a little too technical, but maybe not, because we're getting involved recently with clients who've done pilots with the administration of the pilot after everybody goes home and the project's built, and the Jim Gildays of the world figure out how they work this. It's not uncommon in our recent experience for the town and the developer, for reasons that are for the good and welfare of the town's finances, to work out quarterly payments under the pilot agreement, year by year, that are relatively fixed, estimated, right? So that you know what you're going to be bringing in every quarter. At the end of the year, the audit is done, you do a true-up. The developer may have overpaid, or he may have underpaid, and you make the adjustment at that point. But the finance officers at least have a confidence in knowing that they're gonna get $16,000 every quarter, and they can plan on that. So that's partly why and the other thing that we've learned is that a lot of towns who did pilots in the 80s and 90s never looked at the audits. I was a developer who did a lot of work in Trenton in the 80s, downtown, and we sold some buildings later and learned that the audits we turned in had never been actually looked at by anybody in City Hall. So I know that won't gonna happen here. That's not gonna happen here. But somebody needs to read the documents. You get an administrative fee. I don't know whether Matt mentioned this. In addition to the pilot and the land tax, you get a 2% of the pilot revenues or an additional fee that you get to collect to pay for your personnel cost in administering it.
Well, every town needs a Jim Gilday, that's all I'm saying, exactly. And a Heather Ray, I might add.
And a Scott
And a
Wilson.
Scott, exactly.
Our audits will be read. Thank you.
Councilman Mackey, did you have a question?
I just wanted to thank Councilman Dardia for that question and the professionals tonight, because I think you really have spoken to some of the fears of the constituency, to know that there are so many safeguards with the numbers, because we hear a lot of stories about funny numbers, and so to know that every step of the way, from the pre-project, during, and after, the numbers are constantly being audited and evaluated and looked at. So I'm hoping that people listening tonight can feel a little bit more comfortable as you laid it out so eloquently. So thank you.
Right, I have one question for Jim Gilday. Sorry, Jim, because I know it said, but I think we need to hear it from you. What is the impact of this bond ordinance that we'll be introducing tonight on municipal debt service?
Well, let me just start for a moment here. Thank you for your kind words, but I will say that we're already looking at this from the team we have, back to the comment before about the audits, and just want to give the public comfort. If this does move forward, literally this is years away before we do this, but literally our CFO, Scott Olson, myself, Heather, other staff members, we're already talking about and talking with Matt and Bob and our team here about how we're going to handle this to make sure it's administered properly. once you do embark on a project like this, we cannot afford, as a municipality, not to manage it properly long after I'm gone and people are here, to have a system in place so that for the next 30 years, the town's getting the maximum benefit to benefit the taxpayers. To your question about the bonds that are being authorized tonight, as Matt Jessup said, this is merely an authorization. It's not an issuance. This is a little different than we're used to in the sense of we normally do our capital bonding ordinances, our general obligation bonds, authorizing debt service for capital work. And our practice has been, we authorize those bonds, and we'll do that very soon, actually, probably later in the month of March, for 2023's capital work, roads, sewers, projects, et cetera. We have a practice of authorizing them, going out this year and doing that work, spending the money, despite the CFO's concerns, and basically then coming back and then going in and looking to see what our strategy is to manage those debt service costs, staying in notes for a few years, going out to bond. And as we've talked about previously, this year, the bonding, we went out to bond for a few years of authorizations, getting up to a critical mass that we thought was an appropriate time to sell bonds. As you know, we did great in our bond sale, AAA rated town, which was mentioned before. But the thing about this authorization tonight does not equal any debt service obligation this year or next year, or at least until a year after we issue the bonds. And as Matt Jessup said earlier, it's probably at least 2 years away, if not longer, depending on how things go. And what ends up happening is when you issue bonds, it's not till really the following year where you're obligated to pay debt service. And we have a lot of options at our disposal, whether staying in notes, going to the bond market if the interest rates are favorable at the time. And we can, as we've seen over many years here, we're able to manage our debt service very well. So we're very confident here, obviously Scott and myself, about what's happening tonight. And again, it will not impact our municipal budget this year or next year, the year after at this point, and we'll see what happens going forward.
But to reiterate to what Matt said, none of that debt service will be required until the revenue from the pilot is coming in to cover it.
Correct, and that's the other big difference here, is that with all the mechanisms put in place to protect the town or to guarantee revenues coming in to offset the cost of these debt service, this is different than our normal capital ordinances. We'll go out, we'll borrow money, and then we have to figure out a way in the future to offset those debt service costs, which is why we manage our debt service so strategically. But in this case, the mechanism is built in here, the revenue projection is built in, protect the taxpayer for having to actually bear the cost of those debt service costs when they do come on board.
Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
So, should we move on with the agenda for this evening? And, okay, thank you so much, and thank you to our professionals for great presentation and your great answers and questions and so forth. It was great. So moving on, Ms. Lawshe, are there any advertised hearings?
Yes, Mayor, we have 3 advertised hearings tonight. The first is a hearing for general ordinance number 2023-04, an ordinance amending the town code as it relates to vacant and/or abandoned properties. Anyone wishing to be heard on general ordinance number 2023-04, please come up to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. Seeing no one, Mayor, you may close the hearing.
This hearing is closed.
Second is a hearing for general ordinance number 2023-05, an ordinance amending the property maintenance code of the town of Westfield. Anyone wishing to be heard on general ordinance number 2023-05, please come up to the microphone and state your name and address for the record. Seeing no one, Mayor, you may close the hearing.
This hearing is closed.
Last is a hearing for general ordinance number 2023-06, an ordinance amending the sidewalk cafe ordinance of the town of Westfield. Anyone wishing to be heard on general ordinance number 2023-06, please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. Seeing no one, Mayor, you may close the hearing.
This hearing is closed. Councilman Parmalee, please move for the adoption of general ordinance number 2023-04.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move for the adoption of general ordinance number 2023-04 on second reading, an ordinance amending the town code as it relates to vacant and/or abandoned properties.
May I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Grippo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Councilmembers Howgood,
Yes.
Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGripo,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Mackey. Contract, Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion has carried.
I'd also like to move for the adoption of general ordinance number 2023-05 on second reading, an ordinance amending the property maintenance code of the town of Westfield.
May I have a second? Second by Councilman Mackey. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Council members Hapgood,
Yes.
Parmalee,
Yes.
Agrippa,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Mackey. Contract, Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yep.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion has carried.
And then lastly, I'd like to move for the adoption of general ordinance number 2023-06 on second reading, an ordinance amending the sidewalk cafe ordinance of the town of Westfield.
May I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Katz. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Council members Hapgood,
Yes.
Parmalee,
Yes.
Agrippa,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Mackey. Contract, Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion has carried. May I have a motion to approve the minutes from the Town Council Conference and regular meetings of February 14, 2023? So moved. Motion by Councilman Mackey, second.
Second.
Second by Councilman LaGrepo. Any discussion? All in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? This motion is carried. Now it's time for open discussion by citizens. Anyone may come up to the microphone and speak to the council on any subject on which we have jurisdiction. Please state your name and address for the record and limit your comments to 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Frank Fusaro, 422 Stanley Avenue, Westfield. I'm going to jump around a little. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. If someone can please try to answer them, it would be greatly appreciated. First, I'd like to start off by saying that the slide you had up there with your $7 million of rough annual income coming into the town, I've mentioned it several times at the meeting, and you still insist on saying it's $7 million. It does not, Mr. Parmalee, include the debt service. So if you could please reduce your $210 million income to the town to $140 million, it would be greatly appreciated. I've asked and requested that numerous times. As you know, the documents that are being discussed this evening were provided to the public approximately 3 days ago on a Saturday afternoon. The entire package, including all the addendum and exhibits, is over 1,500 pages. 408 pages of that is the redevelopment agreement. I'm assuming, as I asked the last time when the redevelopment plan was proposed, that every council person here has had the time to read the entire 408-page redevelopment agreement in 3 days. I'm also perplexed as to how the redevelopment agreement was prepared in the 2 weeks time period between the last council meeting and this one. Was this a foregone conclusion months or years ago, since it would have been impossible for someone to prepare it in the 2-week time period? As I mentioned, I'm going to jump around a little, and I apologize in advance. Based on the documents that were provided several days ago, as you know, the height of the buildings that on the various sites that have been tossed around have basically had a 75-foot height limit. However, I'm going to point out 3 instances based on the sketches that were provided in the agreement where the heights of these buildings grossly exceed the 75 feet. The office towers on the South Avenue parking lot have a height of 59 feet 4 inches. However, careful examination of the drawings that are provided show a 21-foot high mechanical equipment screen on top of that 59 feet, which makes that building 80 feet 4 inches tall. Similarly, the apartment, and that's found on page 119 of your agreement. Page 131 of your agreement shows the Lord and Taylor apartment tower, and I'm calling it a tower because that's what it is. It's 74 feet 2 inches high, again with a 15-foot equipment screen on top of it, for a total of 89 feet 2 inches, a 90-foot building. The next building is located on page 135 of your report, of your agreement, I'm sorry. The Lord and Taylor Apartments at the Memorial Park, which is the other side. That building is 71 foot 2 inches tall with a 15-foot equipment screen on top for a total of 86 feet 2 inches. Again, none of these buildings are 75 feet tall. They're over 80 feet tall. I'd like to address the north parking garage next. Once again, as I've stated numerous times at these meetings, the north side parking garage will not function as you have it designed. Ingress and egress is not allowed within 100 feet of a traffic light intersection. The proposed driveway is only 50 feet from the signalized intersection at Central Avenue and North. This will never be approved by the New Jersey DOT, yet your plans continue to include this. Why has no one from Streetworks or your traffic consultant contacted New Jersey Department of Transportation or the County of Union to get their feedback and or approval of this location? In addition, the presentations constantly mention that this is going to be a green project. However, if you read the agreement closely, it says that your goal is for a LEED silver certification, but it's only a goal. It says it will not be filed with the United States Green Council. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not worth the paper it's written on. It's just a goal. If you want to truly have a green building, file the LEED certification, do the paperwork, and do it correctly. You talk about green and environmental aspects, yet Streetwork is not formally applying for any LEED certification. The construction contracts call for minority participation goals, as we've seen this evening as well. But it doesn't state any percentages of these goals. These are just goals. Please confirm that the town is also paying, which no one has mentioned, $1.75 million for the environmental remediation at the South Avenue and North Avenue surface parking lots. Another piece of information that's tucked away in the agreement is that the town will be paying $500,000 to Streetworks as the construction manager. This is like the rooster watching over the hen house.
I'm sorry, Mr. Fashar, you're out of time.
I'm out of
Thank you.
time?
Yeah, you are.
No
Thank
problem,
you.
I will be back.
Joe Salemi, 773 Clark Street. While I feel there have been many misleading statements and representations by the mayor, Streetworks, Topology, and others involved in various aspects of this process, in my view, the most egregious are those regarding the pilot program, as the mayor predicted. The first is that there are no implications for the school budget. As the mayor frequently stated, the school budget will always be 100% funded. That statement, while true, I believe misleads as it totally ignores the source of those funds. Without a commitment by this council in the pilot agreement to share funding with the schools, all of the burden of increased costs will fall on the general taxpayer. Potentially $189 million in tax revenue will not be available for any increases in school operating expenses, only the minuscule land taxes. It has also been stated that the residential portion of this project will not appreciably increase the school enrollment. I agree that's not likely. But regardless, school operating costs will increase as they are currently projected for next year, just to cover normal contractual salary and wage increases. So yes, the funding of the school budget is most certainly impacted. The second reason is that the only way this project can work is with pilot funding versus conventional taxes. The primary reason for this seems to be ensuring that what Mr. Powell asserts, based on his expertise, is adequate profitability for Streetworks to invest. Maybe that is true, but given what's at stake for Westfield, we need an independent review of this claim. There's too much money involved here. Moreover, in his consolidated financial model, comparing pilot revenue to conventional tax revenue, Mr. Powell's analysis assumes that the municipal purpose share of the projected conventional taxes would be limited to the historical town share of 16%. I don't understand why. There is no law or regulation, at least that I'm aware of, requiring that. The town can claim more than that if it desires for some of the proposed capital projects. If over 30 years the pilot payments end up totaling the claimed $221 million, all of it would go to the town and zero to the school operating costs, not capital costs. The conventional taxes over the same period would be approximately $315 million. At the historical 60% level of total taxes required by the schools, they could receive as much as $189 million or about $6 million per year. My numbers are based on the updated data we got a couple of days ago. So it's a little bit higher, at least as I understood it, it's a little bit higher than the original charts that were on the screen and in the original financial presentation. If the pilot goes forward, as I'm sure it will, the agreement needs to be at least amended to guarantee an amount of annual funding for school operating costs. Many towns, for example, Cranford, Garwood, Metuchen, and Cedar Grove, to name a few, dedicate a portion of pilot payments up front to their schools. I don't know why that can't happen here. While generally I support the objectives and certain elements of this project, all involved need to be more forthcoming regarding the details, realities, and potential liabilities involved, starting with delaying any votes. Residents must have adequate time to digest and understand the over 1,500 pages of key documents and obligations published for the first time only a few days ago. To do otherwise, to not give us more time, is simply wrong. Finally, I'm disappointed to say that my 4 decades of working for, with, and advising hundreds of local elected officials and many governing bodies, I've never encountered a group that has acted in such a disingenuous manner as this. Unfortunately, it's my own hometown. Thank you.
Hello, Bill Fitzpatrick, 408 Birch Place. I just have some comments on the discussion on the projections and a lot of talk from Mr. Powell and the council today. So on the west zone, the whole discussion, could that be built on its own with conventional taxes? Mr. Powell said that his projections are conservative. The residential vacancy rate used at either 6.5% or 7.5% is high. Most quality residential projects really kind of stabilize at about 96%. He also mentioned that the growth rates are low. So if you had the lower vacancy rates and somewhat higher growth rates, your IRR is going to be better than the 7.2%. The third thing I noticed when I looked at the numbers over the weekend, there's a very high land value that starts in the West Zone projections, $32 million. And when you do the math on that, it really looks like it's the value on residential zoning after the zoning. So it's got more square footage. Residential values are about twice what office values are. So by having a high land value to start in an IRR projection also results in a lower IRR. The value before the zoning change was probably because it was all office retail, and I know the zoning added about 75% buildable area. That land value is probably like $10 million, $10, $15 million. So the IRRs would be much different. So I can't believe that you can't build residential in Westfield on conventional taxes. You look up and down the Raritan Valley line at all the other communities. Also, I don't believe that anyone would build a Best Buy, Staples, or Walmart there. They belong out on the highways. Another question for Mr. Powell. Using a Morristown or a Short Hills office comp, those markets are right on the highway. We're over 2 miles from the Garden State Parkway, probably more to Route 78. So I don't think they're really relevant comps. Yep, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm Bob McNamara, 603 Lawrence Avenue. One minor issue relative to parking. I looked at THA's revised plan, and they have existing 71 spaces dedicated to shoppers in Lot 2. That's the Christmas tree lot. In the proposed, it's now moved further away from the stores. So it's moving 63 spaces to Lot 8, which is behind Lamani and Adler. So the shoppers are further away from the actual shops. So I would suggest instead, in the new plan, you dedicated 20 spaces to employees in Lot 2. I would shift that to the shoppers. So again, they stay as close to the shops as possible That seems like a reasonable switch to me in terms of that. I also looked at the parking garages. The parking garage has now increased by 32 spaces, so it's a half a story taller than it was just 2 weeks ago. Of those 352 spaces, 35 are allocated for the adjacent HPC residential building. So the developer is not obligated to accommodate his parking requirement on his property. Therefore, with that bonus, HPC is able to build the denser residential building. So now they have 35 units on only 0.28 acres. I think that obligation then falls on our building, and that garage is now larger than necessary. We were accommodating 298 spaces dedicated to commuters, and so now it will be bigger and more costly. I would suggest that since we are now paying for these residential spaces, I would have the town insist that those spaces be on the top floor. Why would you inconvenience the commuters who have to walk all the way to the train station by having them go up another floor? So as part of the agreement, I would say the top floor has to be for those 35 residents. Let them walk further since they're not paying for it. I wanted also to talk about, earlier tonight, the lawyer talked about mitigating requirements for the lost parking spaces. So currently we have 624 spaces, and the north side parking garage will have the 298 that I talked about before. So that's a deficiency of 326 spaces that would have to get mitigated during construction. And this is important because per the construction schedule, all of the south side construction happens at one time. So the parking garage as well as HBC's buildings, all of that happens exactly at the same time. Okay, our parking garage gets the soil mitigation happening first, but in essence, all of that construction is happening at the same time. So we are and truly have to mitigate 326 spaces during that construction period. This brings me to my suggestion. As I've highlighted previously, both the north and south parking garages are too small and inefficient. Jim Zullo of THA basically did not dispute that notion at the last meeting. They're not long enough to have sufficient flat areas or gentle ramps. Both of the buildings will have ramps that are almost 6%. What that means is that's very inconvenient for people to walk, for people to drive, and also the ADA spaces cannot be accommodated on the ramping portion of the building. So always the ADA spaces would be in the flat section of the buildings. Likewise, the south garage right now has only 56 spaces per level, so it's very inefficient. So what I'm suggesting is that instead, why don't we build a single garage on the south side? It could be longer, more efficient. It'd be actually similar to Summit's parking garage, which has a nice long footprint for its commuters. Then we could meet some of the master plan's reexamination goals. It could be surrounded by uses. HBC's components could in essence wrap that new building. It wouldn't be standalone, which we said in the report we didn't want to have. It could have lower, safer, sloped ramps. It would be shorter, 2 stories plus roof. And the beauty of this plan is that the efficiency would actually be less.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wagner, you're out of time.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Mayor and Council. Tony Laporta, 409 North Chestnut Street. I have my timer here, Mayor. I checked last time you cut me off by about 10 seconds as I was trying to read this opinion from an attorney, an independent attorney. So I will read it again. And this has to do with the public question, non-binding referendum or a public question. It is because of New Jersey Appleseed's expertise in this matter that I understand that you, a member of 2 community organizations, Westfield Advocates and Residents for Westfield, have asked for our opinion about the question stated above. Contrary to public statements made by counsel representing Westfield, we think that it is legal. We think that the legal issue is clear, is not one of first impression, has been resolved by the New Jersey Supreme Court, a municipality's authority to place a public question on the ballot for non-binding vote regarding matters within its legislative jurisdiction is permitted and is not restricted by explicit prohibitions placed on voters' statutory rights of initiative and referendum. So that's for the public record. I think we all know this to be a fact. It's true. And I believe the town is hiding behind the fog of a misinterpretation of the law. The law is clear. It's a Supreme Court case. It is absolutely clear. In fact, it's crystal clear, to take the words of my friend Tom Jardine, town attorney. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing, a lot of pages were delivered to you on Saturday to be prepared for this hearing. Can I see a sign, a show of hands of council members and mayor who actually read the documents in full, from start to end? Mr. Mayor? You read all the pages, and you understand them. Would you permit some members of the group to ask you questions outside of this 5-minute restriction about this?
No, Mr. Laporta, we're sticking with the standard comment.
Okay, so you read them, but you wouldn't allow to get an in-depth discussion. You won't allow that. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, third thing, and Mayor, all due respect, this has been asked of me by many people I've talked to. Will you state for the record that you will not seek, accept any employment from Streetworks, from Hudson Bay, their subsidiaries, affiliated companies, associated companies, either as a direct employee or a consultant? That's it. Could I have an answer, Mayor?
This is public comment, Mr.
Okay,
Laporta.
that's another thing I want to talk to you about. You always state that you're going to answer our questions or answer anyone's questions after the public hearing is over. First mayor ever to do this. We always had a dialogue. I was a councilman. Tom Jardine was mayor. He accepted it this way. Oftentimes, you do not answer questions. There are so many questions that you just don't answer. I don't know why. You say you're going to answer them. I wish you would answer every question that is asked of you. That's the only way we can have a dialogue. That's the only way we can have democracy. Because if we stand here and ask you questions, and then you blow us off, what is that? We're just wasting everybody's time. But, this is a pretty dedicated group. We're going to keep coming back. So please, Mayor, write down the questions and please answer them. Thank you.
Good evening, Carla Bonacci, 603 Lawrence Avenue. From the beginning of the public input process for this project, we've been stating that there could be serious red flags with the size and scale of the One Westfield project, that this needed to be more fully understood as to potential impacts and compared to potential alternatives, that this project was too big in its physical scale, and there is no attempt to integrate the new development with the existing town and neighborhoods. This violates professional best practices of sound community planning. And then in declaring that the Lord and Taylor redevelopment plan can be consistent with itself while ignoring the ULCL and the substantial majority of the master plan goals and objectives in plain English, there is now significant concern that this redevelopment agreement would align with what Westfield residents should expect and deserve to promote and protect our public interest. So now, after review of the hundreds of pages of legal agreements and exhibits posted over the weekend, we are now certain that the public costs and impacts for overall OWP project, and especially the development of the town's public sites, are probably not worth the projected public benefits. I'm going to speak now to a few items in the exhibits in Article 4, project details, Exhibit C, development plan. There is no context. These are cartoons. They're diagrams that doesn't relate to the sites. These are big buildings. They're 6 stories high. They've got penthouses. They're bulky. They're long buildings, 200 to 500 feet long, longer than a New York City block, with little 10-foot incisions every 90 feet. There's a sky bridge in a suburban community. Why? I thought you wanted people on the sidewalk to activate the sidewalks. You've got buildings that cast long shadows on historic structures. There were never any shadow studies done. You're blocking the World War I obelisk. The Christmas tree you're removing, people asked to put it back. You haven't even done that. You've got I found this interesting. You're allowing a deviation of a 10% increase in square footage for retail, office, and medical. That'd be another 31,000 square feet for private development. I'm wondering why. You're saying it's not material. I think it's material on a site that's already overbuilt. Why would you let the developer permit him to enter into third-party agreements after 2 years of a parking garage that he's built that's 4 stories? He's going to be able to build a garage that's rightly sized, that's cost-effective to build. You'll have moved the commuters into an inefficient lot, and yet you're going to let this developer lease it out to other people. On Exhibit D, design standards, the entire exhibit's about 20 pages. It consists of photos, a few very vague sentences on design intent. It's fundamentally useless for future planning and zoning officials and boards and the technical review committee to call balls and strikes on what types of buildings and features and streetscape can be built and what elements should not. Design standards should comprise a comprehensive set of zoning minimums and maximums with clear statements. By way of example, Topology created a 350-page comprehensive land development ordinance for the town of Morristown. It's an excellent document. I wish you had done that and put that into this agreement so that there would be some boundaries, because there aren't any. Frank already mentioned, and I just can't even believe that you would list lead silver and not obligate the developer to file with USGBC, when today most developers are striving and getting gold and platinum. So, take that out, because if you don't make them do that, you cannot say you're green. Let's see. Okay. Your overall plan is too commingled to have proper controls and circuit breakers that protect the public's investment if the developer's expected lease-up, occupancy, and net revenue do not come to fruition. The developer has set up their circuit breakers in place with a variety of LLCs and holding companies. So what happens if the various triggers are not met? But if does the project simply stop cold? Are there reversionary rights for the town to recoup their development rights? Can the town rebid the unbuilt parts of the project? So far, all the project finance is self-contained pro forma analysis. I'm done.
Your time is up.
Oh, darn. Okay, make sure on your milestones for Exhibit H that you actually put them on Exhibit G, because all of the float is hidden in the milestones, and you cannot correlate it to this document if you want to really use it as a tool.
My time hasn't started yet, right? It starts when I give my name.
It just started.
It just started. Okay, Carrie Murphy, 502 Cotting Road. First, I've been remiss the last few times I've gotten up to speak. I have not thanked Councilman LaGrippo for all of his time, hard work, attention, and dedication to the Westfield taxpayers. Not just his ward constituents, but those in all the other wards. I live in Ward 4, and I can tell you for certain that I have not heard a single word from our ward reps about this overdevelopment or any other projects. Yet they vote on my behalf time and again. What a complete joke that is. Meeting after meeting, Councilman LaGrippo is a voice of reason for the town. He takes a lot of heat from all of you up there, and quite honestly, it's a disgrace the way he's treated, but he still speaks for the residents, so for that, I thank you, Mark. I've given a lot of thought to something which I wanted to share with you all in hopes that you can answer some questions. How did Westfield go from being a sought-after town for developers to one that's now seeking pilot developers? How did we go from being a self-sufficient and self-sustained town to one that's blighted and in need of redevelopment? How can we have a AAA rating, financially speaking, and need the assistance of a redeveloping or blighting and a pilot program funding? How did we go from a town where the public was offered a referendum vote to help decide on major development projects, very much like the parking deck vote that you, Mayor Brindle, yourself participated in, where you voted no, along with 77% of those who voted? How did we go from being a town that could manage and maintain its needs, its parks, fields, safety, public works, etc., to a town that's now essentially living paycheck to paycheck, or better stated, pilot program to pilot program, since according to the administration, in my opinion, it seems we need these pilot developer funding to fix problems in the town, most of which I believe are being manufactured by the developments themselves that seem to be rubber stamped in. I can think of no other mayor in Westfield's history that has had to rely on pilot programs to effectively run this town, in my opinion. It's just not so. We do not need these pilot programs. And if we do, why do we? I fear we taxpayers have been so severely misled into believing the town is on the brink of disaster that these projects seem almost logical and necessary to residents in order to fix our town. How did we ever thrive and survive as a town prior to the current administration taking office? We must have been a wreck before you arrived. Perhaps we need to sit back and consider why we are where we are. Perhaps it's not the town, because the town hasn't really changed that much. It's not the people. We're still surrounded by some of the most endearing, loving, and hardworking people I've known. It's not the sense of community. Nope, that's still there. The only thing that's really changed, as far as I can see, is the leadership. The leadership in their view of what they want Westfield to be. The leadership, that's what's changed, in my opinion. Perhaps in the end, we don't need to reimagine Westfield at all, but rather we need to reimagine our leadership. Perhaps it's time we reimagine our leadership. How much time do I have left?
You have 90 seconds.
Okay. So it seems that, and I won't have time to finish, but it seems that, Mayor Brindle, you believe the tap-into survey and residents' petitions, currently at 2,300 and counting, is insignificant, and we're speaking and you're not hearing us. You denied us a referendum vote, and guess what? We started our own vote, and it's pretty good. The residents are speaking, and you don't seem to be hearing us. The rush to vote this overdevelopment through, the facts and the data, or the lack thereof, in my opinion, to support such a tremendous amount of residential, office, and retail space just doesn't make sense. What is the rush? Why is this administration slamming yet another overdevelopment project through the approval process? Common sense tells me to see how the other overdevelopments work out first before completely reconfiguring our town, our downtown, with one Westfield Place, resulting in likely a negative long-term impact on traffic congestion, school crowding, and taxes. At this point in time, we've only been discussing one Westfield Place. Not once have you mentioned in the same sentence or represented on paper all of the overdevelopments that have been approved or are in the works. Westfield Crossings, 193 units. Williams Nursery, 162 units. The Sophia, 60 units. 526 North Ave, 40 units. 440 North Ave, 10 units. 415 South Ave, 20 units. And that's probably a small sampling. I don't know what they all are. You can hopefully provide that to us. Tap into the leader. Please follow up with the town and find out what all the overdevelopments are so that the residents are aware. Plus Streetworks overdevelopment, the condos on Central Avenue. by Dunkin' Donuts, the apartment near the
I'm sorry,
Holy
Carrie.
Trinity.
Ms. Murphy,
And
you're-
let's not
you're-
forget, all of these
I'm
come with
sorry,
retail space.
I gave you 10 extra sec,
How
I
is
gave
all
you
of
10
this
extra
extra retail
seconds.
space going to
Thank
help
you.
bring
Your
traffic to
time is up.
downtown?
Thank you.
How is it going to happen? We need
Ms.
to know.
Murphy, I'm sorry.
I know, but we
Your
need to know.
time- your time is
I have
up.
asked for this. You were able to haunt that, give
Ms.
up. You
Murphy.
gave us a map for haunting the houses.
Mi-
Give us a map
Ms.
for our
Ms.
overdevelopments.
Murphy, your
It's
time
common
is up.
sense.
Allison Carey, 408 East Dudley Avenue. I'm probably going to cover a couple of things just off the top of my head. The first being something that Mr. Laporta touched on, transparency, communication, disclosure of information in a timely manner to the citizens of Westfield. I've been up here about 4 times talking about serious, important financial questions that have been asked by finance professionals in this town that have not been answered. They're not trivial. They're not frivolous. They were very well thought out questions by people who have been trying to analyze the data that has not been provided. Some have been answered. Many have not. We met with Linda once, had to meet in the preview center, which was chaotic. I think we got through about 3 questions. She agreed to meet with us again and then canceled 2 hours before the meeting. And I have not heard back from her since. We have requested a follow-up meeting 3 times. I have not even received an email back, the courtesy of an email back. She committed to answering the questions that we provided. They have not been answered. Okay, and now everyone's had 3 days to read through 1,000+ pages, and apparently the model is now available. So we've been asking repeatedly for data and market research to back up the assumptions that are funding the pilot. People in this town are concerned about the assumptions being made for these pilot revenue numbers that seem very overly optimistic that are supposed to repay the development bonds. And we're not getting it. And I'm just, one example I had to write down. The preposterous assumption that employees were going to spend $30 a day, 4 days a week, for an annual amount of $8 million to be pumped into our downtown. So we questioned that. Nobody here backed that up and defended it. Instead, you changed the number. Still no data. So now the new number is $22 per day for an annual amount of $5.9 million. Nothing to back that up. That's just one example. And that is one of the assumptions that is going in to the pilot revenues. That's the future of this town. And in 30 years, who knows what things are going to look like. And it goes back again also to the schools. And I'm getting frustrated. Somebody else has already brought it up. We all know the schools have to be 100% funded. We've agreed on that. You haven't allocated anything to the operating costs of the schools. Mr. Salem noted 4 other towns. If you're that committed to the schools and pre-K or kindergarten, you would have funds from the pilot program funded to the schools, and you haven't. Okay, we're painting the tunnel under the railroad, but we can't allocate a certain percentage of the funds to our schools' operating costs. Okay, and the bottom line is, if they aren't met, we are gonna have to pay for it. There's no other way to say it, okay? The lack of disclosure, we've had to put in at least 4 OPR requests. Another, Linda told us, please don't do that. Please just ask me. It's such an administrative nightmare. We're not getting the answers. At least 4 OPR requests. They've all been extended. We haven't gotten one bit of information. Delays and extensions, and now here we are voting. It's disgraceful.
I'll give it to her. Hello, Susan Goodman, 322 Arenda Circle. I am here to represent the 70% of the town residents who do not like this plan. I know you want to ignore that. You wouldn't give us a vote. You wouldn't give us a public question. When TAP was nice enough to give us a survey, you discredited it. You said that we tried to sway it. You ignored it. So I started to go door to door. I'm continuing to go door to door. I will go door to door as many times as I can get out, to every house, to every street, to every neighborhood. Because as I continue to do that, I meet wonderful people. I'm losing weight. I'm almost getting down to my triathlon weight, and I don't need Weight Watchers. So thank you, Mayor Brindle, because my doctors are ecstatic about this. But when I go, I hear the same thing. They don't want you to sell the soul of our town to a corporate devil. They'd like a town square, they'd like a green, they'd like to have a psychedelic tunnel from one end of the railroad station to the other. They would like some improvements. They would like a little more parking, but indeed, we're gonna get less parking than what we already have, and don't try to snow us, because we went and counted. And so did several residents in town that don't come here. They also counted, and they can't add it up. It just doesn't add up. They don't want the pilot. They don't understand why you're giving a corporate a tax break when we all have to pay regular taxes. The people on Charles Street and North Avenue and Clark at the beginning, you live approximately 2 to 3 blocks east of the intersection of North and Central, and 1 block north. No one's going to cut through Fairmont Avenue because the North Avenue gets crowded. You are not like the people on Charles Street. They're going to look out their back window or sit on their little deck and have to see a 5, 7, 8-story high-rise. You don't have to live 2, 3 blocks down from all this that's going to go on. So don't minimize it, because you all live, except for you, Mr. Dardia, you all live a distance. You all live a distance from where all this is going to happen. So what people say to me is they don't think you're going to rent all that commercial and that retail space, and it's going to lay empty. And in fact, sometimes it helps the developer to let it stay empty, because they could take a loss, and then they won't have to make up the additional on the pilot. It's going to give us increased services. They're still afraid of the traffic. Yes, you don't want to hear all this, because this is what I hear when I go everywhere, and you don't want to hear it. But the lawn signs are increasing. And then, of course, we were getting increased numbers on our petition, except the 30%, somebody in that 30% who wants this project, hacked our first right amendment to have a petition, because you won't give us a vote, and you dished our survey. And they signed it, I love elephants, Chicken Little. Now that's very immature, isn't it? So those are the people that are following you that want this project. They're immature, not intelligent, and idiotic, because you don't do that to somebody's first right amendment. So you could laugh all you want, but I will continue to go. And as this project progresses, you're going to have hiccups. Nothing's going to go right, and nothing's going to go perfect. And as long as it takes years to get this accomplished, I will take years to go to all the residents. And when you run into some problems, we're going to rally up, because we're not stopping. And then the residents will speak for themselves. November comes an election. I'm going to make sure that I go door to door and let them know what is up.
Anybody else? Oh.
My name is Michael Armento, 30 Sandra Circle. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Lou Grippo for continuing to be the voice of reason on this town council. My fellow concerned citizens have brought forth issues with the financials, the parking, traffic, safety, feasibility of actually renting the office spaces, and so on. I speak to what this project does to the charm and character of Westfield. The town survey, which you guys commissioned, results indicated that people did not want to lose the charm of the town. The project not only changes, but demolishes it. When looking across the town while sitting in the increased traffic and looking for parking spots, which will be less, we will see tall buildings towering over the landscape, no longer able to look at treetops and church steeples, but seeing the machinery at the top of 65 and 75-foot buildings. These large buildings will be casting increased shadows over the town, as has previously been explained. The project opens the door to increased heights of the buildings in the Westfield Business District. Westfield's charm will be gone, no longer a quaint town, but a traffic-filled mess of a city, and it comes with a financial risk if the pilot project does not succeed. Summit put a pause on their redevelopment last summer and took input from the concerned citizens. Councilmember Vartan from Summit, quote, "But we've learned there's a possibility that we can get a revised plan, a plan that could address some of the concerns of the community. Therefore, I think it's our responsibility to pursue it," end quote. I guess their leaders are more responsive to the concerns of their citizens than you are. Summit had Robert Powell as their financial advisor, but then changed and replaced him with a new financial advisor when they put the plan on pause. Certainly, the optics of Summit dissociating from him is not good. Did we do our due diligence? Did we hire the best? Or maybe the definition of the best from this town council is someone who goes along with what the mayor wants. Interestingly, comments from Summit residents also indicated topology had numerous misstatements, and their misstatements in Westfield have been well documented at previous meetings here. The town council's motto does not seem to be what is best for Westfield, but what is best for Mayor Brindle's agenda. There are many concerned residents, whether you like to believe it or not. A pause would have been a good faith opportunity to bring the town together for a potential great redevelopment project, but our mayor and town council chose not to. The citizens that are against this are strong and resilient. We will continue bringing Oprah to review your emails, to check the veracity of the claims that you say there's so much support. As I mentioned before, recall of elected officials is an appropriate recourse when our leaders fail us. I look to the citizens of Millburn who are dealing with similar issues, who are in the process of a recall of the mayor and a town council person. I have reached out to them because this is definitely a strong and viable option for us, and many people are advocating for it. Whether they succeed or not, we can learn from their recall effort and improve ours, so we will succeed, Mayor Brindle. You may be the mayor that started this, but you may not be the mayor that finishes your term. And once again, you have brought Westfield to the brink of further litigation. All you had to do was pause and listen to your constituents. Was it that hard?
Anybody else? Okay, hearing none, I close this portion of the meeting, and I'm happy to address many of the comments that came up, and feel free to chime in if anybody wants to. And I might jump around a little bit. So, Mr. Fisaro, we've been very upfront that the $213 million in pilot payments includes the financing for public improvements. We say it everywhere. We say it's $140 million left. There's no obfuscation there. So, but the money that is funding, the debt that's funding the public improvements, there's value in the public improvements that are embedded in the pilot. So no one's trying to do anything funny there. Yes, of course we read the RDA, and it's absurd to think that our amazing professionals would have just started building and making it 2 weeks ago. Of course, a lot of it is boilerplate language, a lot of it is definitions. Of course they've been working on RDA for a really long time. You plug in those things as they get negotiated. So the notion that it's something that would even be done in 2 weeks is absurd, especially when you look at the top level notch of the professionals that are working on it. As we mentioned about, you keep talking about 1,500 pages of documents. Many of these are the financial agreements, and because there's 8 different entities, they're actually the same document done 8 times with different performers. As we mentioned, they're made public. They're not being voted on tonight. All that information that you're asking for, I think Ms. Carey asked for, the models, the details, it's all publicly available. You've got 2 weeks to look at it. There's a public hearing on these financial documents in 2 weeks. And again, a lot of it is redundant because there are multiple agreements. So there should be plenty of time for everybody to review those and come to the public hearings with their questions. You mentioned the north parking garage. John Federico, our transportation professional, I think spoke to it last week. He did mention that they have reached out to DOT, and DOT initially gave them a look that it was fine. So the notion that no one's been consulted on then is not accurate. And regarding the LEED certification, that's actually very standard practice that a lot of people allow for equivalent of LEED certification without having to go through all the bureaucracy and expense of actually attaining it. So this notion that we actually require all the elements of LEED certification without actually making them go through the hoops of getting it is absurd. At the end of the day, what we care about is that it meets those standards. We don't care if it has a plastic seal on the door. And at the end of the day, I'm sorry, Mr. Fusaro, public comment is closed. And I'm sorry, it is absolutely going to be what it is reflected to be in terms of LEED certification. And regarding the schools and the pilots, it is not legal to put an agreement with the schools in a pilot. That is a separate agreement between the municipality and the school district. So, Mr. Salemi, this notion that we should be putting this pilot agreement or allocation to the schools in a pilot is not allowed. And if you're someone that's worked with municipal governments, you would know that. That is a separate agreement with the schools. And we've actually been in conversations with them, as I've said multiple times, about what capital projects could look like. Mr. McNamara, regarding the parking that you mentioned, you're still here. Streetworks had originally proposed one garage on the south side. We're the ones that wanted them to split it, and that's been incredibly popular with our constituents because of the notion of that half the people currently come from the north side. So actually, the splitting of the parking was a concession that Streetworks made at our request. And there's lots of things that will be certainly continue to be ironed out with parking. And as I mentioned, there is a lease requirement with HBC Streetworks for those spaces, and I guess that will be negotiated in terms of where those spaces actually belong. And Mr. Laporta, I'm not even going to address the referendum. That's been addressed, and that's been, as far as I'm concerned, that issue's been put to bed. And I will tell you, I am not going to give you the benefit of a response to the absolute insult that implies that there's any impropriety going on here with anybody with our relationship with Streetworks. So I'm sorry. It doesn't even warrant the benefit of a response to that. And I'm sorry, Ms. Bonacci, and I'm sorry I'm taking notes, but the notion that you say that this violates best practices of sound community planning flies absolutely in the face of the American Planning Association, who has reached out, about Smart Growth America that has reached out, and all the agencies that have been through that preview center, and this absolutely represents the best planning principles in place. So I feel, and I think we feel really, really good about that. And I'm sorry, Ms. Murphy, yeah, you're right, leadership has changed. And you know what, duly elected twice leadership has changed, and they want on a platform of change. And we're delivering on everything that we've committed to since we were elected in 2017. And regarding the overdevelopment that people like to talk to, whether it's Westfield Crossing, Williams Nursery, and North Avenue, the person you can ask about that is Councilman LaGrippo, who happened to be in the administration that actually created that affordable housing obligation that is now enabling all that overdevelopment to happen, which I don't believe it's overdevelopment. And Ms. Carey, I'll just say, I know you mentioned about the financial questions. As I mentioned, it is all publicly available now and will be for the next 2 weeks until that comes up for a vote. And by the way, this notion about employee spending and that the numbers change, there is a third party that's validating those. but you misspoke, I think, because the employee spending is unrelated to the financial success of the project. And I think you mentioned that that was a figure that was calculated into the pilot, and that's incorrect. It's actually irrelevant to the financial success of this project. And Mr. Armonti, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Obviously, we have a very different understanding. You think this loses the charm of the town. I think this project enables us to preserve the charm of the town. I don't think building along flat surface parking lots along the rail line is any indication of losing charm of the town. If anything, it preserves our ability to sustain what is so awesome about this town for future generations. And regarding Summit, I speak to the Summit mayor all the time. I'm intimately familiar with what is going on there. Their redevelopment project, by the way, I might add, Summit already has multiple parking garages. They have 175,000 square feet of office space, which has been rented by Boston Consulting Group and McKinsey. And to follow up on something Mr. Powell said about what he learned in Morristown, what Mayor Ravis will tell you in Summit is all those McKinsey and Boston Consulting employees are the ones that have bought homes in Summit for the very reason that he said the same thing happened in Morristown. And by the way, Topology, I think you mentioned, they were just reappointed in Summit, and I will defend Bob Powell to the hilt. He was not replaced in Summit. Summit has made a redirection, and I know I spoke to the mayor about Nassau Capital, and I know if you want to comment on that too, Councilman Hapgood.
Sure, because I also spoke to the town manager, Michael Rogers, when this was brought to our attention and someone asked us to look into it. And to add to the mayor's comments, I asked Michael Rogers if they found anything that was incorrect about Nassau Capital's work. The answer was no. And I asked if they would hire Nassau Capital again in the future, and the answer was absolutely yes.
So, and I'm sorry if I sound exasperated, but some of these insinuations and this notion to try and undermine the credibility of the professionals both in our town and that we've hired are quite frankly offensive. And we can agree to disagree, and we might have different visions, and that's okay. But what is not okay is to undermine the intention and the credibility and the work of the team that has worked so hard. And I think it was very evident in their presentation tonight. So with that, we are going to move on to bills and claims. Councilman Hapgood.
You're so positive about what you're doing. You won't care that I go and talk to the residents.
That's right. Thank you for staying so that we could respond to your questions. Thank you, Mayor. I will move bills and claims in the amount of $685,519.76.
May I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Root. Any discussion? All in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? This motion is carried.
I have 9 resolutions, 4 of which I'd like to move as a package. A resolution authorizing the CFO to draw warrants for participant payment to the Westwood for the annual Me and My Gal Dance. 2, a resolution authorizing the CFO to refund the Recreation Department fees. 3, a resolution authorizing the CFO to draw a check for Board of Adjustment overpayment of application fees for 251 Dudley Avenue East. 4, a resolution authorizing the CFO to draw a check for the Board of Adjustment overpayment of application fees for 612 Downer Street.
May I have a second? Second. Seconded by Councilman Mackey. Any discussion? All in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? This motion is carried.
I'd also like to move a resolution approving a redevelopment agreement and public improvements construction agreement with SW Westfield LLC.
May I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Katz. Any discussion? I actually do have, Councilman Contract couldn't stay on Zoom, but he did leave me with a statement that he wanted me to read. So I will not try to pretend to be David Contract, but I am reading this from him. Unfortunately, I'm not able to attend tonight's meeting because of a conflict with the previously scheduled business trip to California. I participated when I could in tonight's meeting, but had to leave before I had the opportunity to get to for a business obligation. So I am reading this statement on his behalf. As I stated at the last council meeting when the One Westfield Place redevelopment plan was approved, I fully support this project because it directly addresses Westfield's major goals, offers more pros and cons, and significantly mitigates drawbacks. Tonight, I wanted you to know that I would have voted yes on the resolutions and ordinances on first reading that govern the implementation of One Westfield Place, including the redevelopment agreement, the public improvement construction agreement, etc. I'm very impressed with the overall approach and structure that has been put in place to manage the implementation. For residents, I'd like to highlight a few important aspects of this structure and approach that give me great confidence that One Westfield Place will deliver what has been advertised. These include pilot revenues, which deliver a projected $214 million incremental revenues to Westfield over 30 years. A once-in-a-lifetime fiscal opportunity. These revenues help fund $54 million worth of identified public improvements while leaving $140 million left over to address other town needs, such as additional public improvements, new firehouse, stabilizing taxes, investing in Board of Ed capital projects. And risk mitigation. The structure and approach of this proposal significantly reduces town and taxpayer risk. It is smartly phased and includes specific milestones that must be reached before a new phase can be started. One particular risk mitigation is the special assessment, which ensures that they'll make up any funding gaps between projected pilot revenues and town bond payments until pilot revenues have reached 1.15 times debt service for 3 consecutive years. Furthermore, by selling the 2 municipal parcels at fair market value, the town is able to secure first-party land on streetworks properties if they don't follow through on these special assessment obligations. Traffic and parking plans during construction. Explain that streetworks will have to submit traffic and parking plans for each phase of construction subject to town approval. This includes plans to mitigate the loss of commuter parking, which is particularly important during the South Zone construction timeframe. Transfers and revisions are these detailed policies that restrict any transfers by streetworks and require town approval for major revisions to the proposal. I'd like to thank everyone who has worked diligently in developing and finalizing this project and the specific agreements being voted on tonight. This includes members of the council, particularly Councilman Hapgood and Parmalee. I won't say along with Mayor Brindle, but he said it. Town officials, including Jim Gilday, Tom Samet, and Liz Jeffrey, our third-party legal redevelopment financial planning experts, as well as the team from Streetworks. So that is David's comment on the record for tonight. Does anyone have any other discussion, comments to add? Okay, all in favor?
Mayor,
I'm sorry.
Before we vote, I would just like to say that I'm so grateful to David for leaving that statement, to say something positive after, a lot of negative comments at the mic tonight, which I think are unfounded and unfair in many respects. And hopefully, if they were interested in getting our answers to their questions, they would have stayed in the room for the answers. So in any case, this is an incredibly exciting opportunity for the town. We do look forward to the meeting that we'll have in 2 weeks, when we'll have a chance to take more questions about the financial aspects of this that are all incorporated into the ordinances. But thank you, David, wherever you are, and thank you all for being here tonight.
And I'll just add to our professionals and the collective group of professionals, every time you guys get up and present, it makes me feel more confident in the project. And I hope that, and I think that's true from the majority of the public, and that's certainly the feedback that I've been getting. It's an incredibly proud team. I think Westfield can be really proud of the diligence and the competence that has gone into this. And I'm really grateful that you and our Streetworks partners back there have stuck with us. It's the gravity of what we're doing is not lost on any of us, but I think we're all incredibly excited about the road that lies ahead. And I'll just give you one little anecdote because I think it was important. I brought an executive for New Jersey Transit to the preview center on Thursday, and then had lunch with them afterwards because we obviously need a lot from New Jersey Transit, including a one-seat ride. But he said in all the municipalities that they go to all the time, big, small, He's never, ever seen a plan that addresses a holistic view of a town. And he understood the opportunity in front of us. From 10 traffic intersections alone is unheard of. So having that third-party validation happens over and over and over again, and it just is affirmation that we're on a very good path. From the bottom of my heart, thank you to all of you. It has been since as a platform that I know most of us ran on, and to see it really start coming to fruition is, with the pandemic squeezed in the middle, I think is really incredibly gratifying. So with that, please call the roll.
Councilmembers Hapgood,
Yes.
Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGrepo,
No.
Katz,
Yes.
Mackey. Yes. Contract, Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion has carried.
I'd also like to move a resolution approving the application by SWD Westfield Urban Renewal LLC entities 1 through 8, submitted in connection with the project undertaken pursuant to the Lord and Taylor train station redevelopment plan.
May I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Mackey. Any discussion? And this is, as a reminder, this is just for the submission of the application. Please call the roll.
Councilmembers Hapgood,
Yes.
Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGrepo,
No.
Katz,
Yes.
Mackey. Contract, Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yep.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion has carried.
I'd also like to move a resolution authorizing the CFO to make a budget transfer.
May I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Root. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Councilmembers Hapgood,
Yes.
Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGrepo,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Mackey. Yes. Contract, Dardia,
Yes.
Yep.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion is carried.
And I'd like to move a resolution to approve 2023 emergency transfer appropriation.
May I have a second? Seconded by Councilman Mackey. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Councilmembers Hapgood,
Yes.
Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGrepo,
Yes.
Katz,
Yep.
Mackey. Contract, Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion has carried.
Lastly, I'd like to move a resolution to adopt a temporary capital budget.
May I have a second? Seconded by Councilman Mackey. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Councilmembers Hapgood,
Yes.
Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGrepo,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Mackey. Contract, Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion is carried.
Okay. I would like to move general ordinance number 2023-07 on first reading. An ordinance of the town of Westfield and the county of Union, state of New Jersey, authorizing the execution of financial agreements which each of SWD Westfield 1 Urban Renewal LLC, SWD Westfield 2 Urban Renewal LLC, SWD Westfield 3 Urban Renewal LLC, SWD Westfield 4 Urban Renewal LLC, SWD Westfield 5 Urban Renewal LLC, SWD Westfield 6 Urban Renewal LLC, SWD Westfield 7 Urban Renewal LLC, and SWD Westfield 8 Urban Renewal LLC pursuant to the long-term tax exemption law and the redevelopment area bond financing law.
May I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Dardia. Please call the roll.
Councilmembers Hapgood,
Yes.
Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGrepo,
No.
Katz,
Yes.
Mackey. Contract, Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Brindle.
Yes, this motion is carried.
And I'd also like to move general ordinance number 2023-08 on first reading. Ordinance of the town of Westfield and the county of Union, state of New Jersey, providing for the special assessment of the cost of certain public improvements within the Lord and Taylor / train station redevelopment area, and authorizing the execution of special assessment agreements with each of SWD Westfield 1 Urban Renewal LLC, SWD Westfield 2 Urban Renewal LLC, SWD Westfield 3 Urban Renewal LLC, SWD Westfield 4 Urban Renewal LLC, SWD Westfield 5 Urban Renewal LLC, SWD Westfield 6 Urban Renewal LLC, SWD Westfield 7 Urban Renewal LLC, and SWD Westfield 8 Urban Renewal LLC, and further authorizing certain other actions in connection therewith.
May I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilor Mackey. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Councilmembers Hapgood,
Yes.
Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGrepo,
No, no.
Katz,
Yes.
Mackey, Contract, Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Riggle.
Yes, this motion has carried.
Lastly, I would like to move special ordinance number 2023-01 on first reading. Bond ordinance providing for aid to the Lord and Taylor Train Station redevelopment project located in the Lord and Taylor Train Station redevelopment area in and by the town of Westfield and the county of Union, state of New Jersey, appropriating $57 million therefore and authorizing the issuance of $57 million redevelopment area bonds or notes of the town to finance the cost thereof.
May I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Root. Any discussion?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to, something I prepared this evening regarding the bond. When you talk to residents across the state of New Jersey, when you ask them what their vision is of Westfield, and Ms. Mawani is laughing, but it's okay. As chair of the Democratic Committee, you could laugh at me. But when people have a vision of Westfield, they think of a town like Westfield, a suburban town. And I'm voting against the mayor's plan to join with Huntington Bay's company a marriage of big government and big business to forever adversely change the character of our town because of it's simply too much. It excuses a major international conglomerate from paying their fair share of taxes for our schools. It creates hundreds of thousands of square feet of office space where more and more employees are working from home. It creates tens of thousands of square feet of additional retail space where more and more people are shopping from home. It does not increase commuter parking spaces when one of the few things we can all agree on is that we need more parking. As if that is not enough reason to oppose the massive redevelopment, now our residents have to pay the bill. Tonight, the mayor and her administration will saddle current and future generations of Westfield residents with $57 million in debt. That is more debt than has occurred in the aggregate of my 12 years on town council. It's outrageous and irresponsible. We hear that the debt service will be paid with pilot funds, but let me be clear, there's absolutely no guarantee that these funds will be sufficient to do so. We are borrowing $57 million that we do not have and may never have except through massive future property tax increases. What is the average resident living in Westfield getting as part of the $57 million? Are we getting a new firehouse, more classroom space? No, instead we're getting unrecognizable hometown and crushing debt. I'm voting against this reckless borrowing and feckless leadership, so I vote no this evening. Thank you.
Okay. And I'll just like to go on the record that that's totally appreciate, obviously, your point of view, but I hope it also flies in the face, I think, of everything that we saw this evening in terms of a presentation.
Yep.
But, you know, minds will disagree, right? So may I have please call the roll.
Councilmembers Hapgood,
Yes.
Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGrepo,
No.
Katz,
Yes.
Mackey, Contract, Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Riggle.
Yes, this motion has carried. Next is the Public Safety Transportation Parking Committee. Councilwoman Root.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a resolution authorizing participation in the Defense Logistics Program.
May I have a second? Second by Councilman Mackey. Any discussion? All in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? This has been passed.
I would also like to move General Ordinance Number 2023-09 on first reading, an ordinance to amend the code of the Town of Westfield, Chapter 13.
May I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Dardia. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Councilmembers Hapgood,
Yes.
Parmalee,
Yes.
LaGrepo,
Yeah.
Katz,
Yep.
Mackey, Contract, Dardia,
Yes.
Root,
Yes.
Mayor Riggle.
Yes, this motion has carried. Next is the Public Works Committee. Councilman Katz.
Thank you, Mayor. Most importantly, I would like to move a resolution to award 2023 hauling of wood chips.
Of course, we're ending on a wood chip, on a wood chip.
Thanks.
After someone seconds it, I want to make a
I'll
comment.
second. I'll second.
Okay.
May I have a second? Councilman Parmalee, seconds.
But it is an important thing because that also is bringing in new revenue to Westfield. So it's a great program.
It is, it's
Mark,
great.
any comment on this? I'm all for the butcher.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Opposed? This motion is carried. May I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councilman Mackey, seconded by Councilman Dardia. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. This meeting is adjourned.